Oh, I'm gonna go get Fudgicle.
Kathy, when we now have a snow day in school, will the kids be going online, or is it just like the old days? Snow day is a snow day.
Snow day is a snow day. We can't do any remote learning until the governor says that's okay to do.
Yeah.
And the feeling is now, no.
Yeah.
Much better for the kids to be in school.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen, but so far we're doing okay.
Yeah.
And I think having a day off is not only a gift to the kids, but to the staff.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
A little unexpected R&R.
Oh, yeah. Some of my happiest memories are hearing the name of my town on the radio. Listed the schools that were going to be closed.
My kids used to do the snow dance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good evening, all.
Hello, Ryan.
I mean, I didn't want to eat in front of you without offering one, you know?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening. Where are we at?
It is 7 o'clock. And we have a quorum. Recording in progress. All right, I am calling the January 10th, 2022 meeting of the Mansfield Town Council to order. Happy New Year, everybody. This is our first meeting of the new year. And I'm glad to see that Mr. Osberger has rejoined us after having been out ill for several meetings. So welcome back, Charlie.
Thank you.
All right, the first item on our agenda is the roll call. Ms. Jane?
Yes, Osberger.
Here.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder. Coleman.
Here.
Bertoni. I don't see. Oh, there's Mr. Bertoni. Okay. Kotcheberger.
Here.
Moran.
Here.
Shurin.
Here.
Shaken.
Here.
Thank you.
Mr. Bruder will be taking a temporary leave of absence from the council for a month for personal reasons, and we wish him well. Is there anybody here from the public who wishes to address the council? I noticed that there was something which we received regarding the ARPA funds. Mr. Aylesworth, you want to read it into the record?
Sure. This comes from Sam Solorio, and it reads, to whom it may concern, the COVID-19 pandemic has reemphasized a need in our society for outdoor recreational options to support both physical and mental health. Funds from the American Rescue Plan Act seem like an excellent opportunity to build upon Mansfield's outdoor communal spaces. Both Mansfield and Windham are receiving roughly $7 million in ARPA funding. Based on my reading of a recent article in the Chronicle and the agenda for tonight's town council meeting, it seems that Windham plans to spend over $3 million of its ARPA money on a variety of projects to improve outdoor communal spaces and parks, while the totality of Mansfield's plans in that arena are adding Wi-Fi to 2 town parks and building a pavilion at the library. Costs not explicitly listed, but look to be around $100,000 to $200,000. I would like to request that we increase the priority given to improving outdoor communal spaces and parks in Mansfield with ARPA funding to support physical and mental health of our community members as related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to address the council from the public?
I'm not aware of anybody, Madam Mayor.
All right. Then we're on to the report of the town manager, Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you. So I think most people are probably aware we have some cold weather in the forecast, dropping into the low single digits over the next 48 hours. So given that the governor and the Division of Emergency Management and others are joining and strongly encouraging communities to do so, we felt it prudent to get the word out that we're using municipal buildings over that corresponding 48-hour period during business hours as warming stations. So anybody who's having issues with heat in their homes that needs to seek refuge, please don't hesitate to come to one of our many town facilities and get warm and get out of the elements. At a recent meeting, I think it was council's first meeting in December, we talked at some length about the tragic loss of life that had occurred on November 30th when a Yukon graduate student was struck and killed by a car at an uncontrolled crosswalk on 275, also known as South Eagleville Road. We took, as a town, pretty immediate action after that accident involving a joint letter that was prepared and signed by Mayor Moran and Yukon's interim president, President Agunobi. And that letter, in no uncertain terms, asked for Connecticut DOT to take immediate action on addressing 3 uncontrolled crosswalks, including looking at installing RRFBs, rectangular rapid flashing beacons in 3 areas, including the area of the accident on 275. So that basically the section of 275 nearest the intersection with 195 or Storrs Road. And we also asked that 4 uncontrolled crosswalks that are slated to have RRFBs installed on Storrs Road in the downtown area, but slated to have that work happen in 2023, have that happen in 2022. So move those projects up in the queue. And this past week, we received a response from DOT. First and foremost, they have indicated they'd like to meet with town and Yukon officials and talk about pedestrian safety in these areas and make sure they're understanding our pedestrian safety concerns. And they also indicated a willingness to move up the installation of the RRFBs on 195 a year as we requested. It does not this immediate time necessarily look like we made headway getting the state support on RRFBs on South Eagleville Road, but that's why we're going to have a meeting and we're going to have some discussion and hopefully begin to arrive at a path forward. So that meeting will be taking place this month, exact day and time still to be determined. So I will keep the council posted, and in particular the mayor, she'll be taking part in that meeting as well. We have our 10th and final session of the Mansfield Local Government Academy this Thursday. It's graduation week. We'll actually be covering some new content as well. We'll be talking about appointed boards and committees and have some guest speakers from various boards and committees meet with the group. But this will be the wrap-up session. We'll also obviously take an opportunity to talk with participants about the program, get a better sense of what they liked, what they didn't like as much, so we can continue to improve that program in the future. But it's been a fun ride. It's been 10, I thought, very engaging sessions with great participation and a lot of positive feedback. And myself, department heads, our staff, we really look forward to making this a tradition on an annual basis moving forward. The FY 22-23 budget season has basically officially kicked off. Guidance was sent out to department heads just before last month's holiday, and transmissions or requests are due back to my office and finance at the tail end of this week, and that's operating and capital improvement requests, and we'll start to do one-on-one meetings with department heads to go over their requests next week. So it's very early in the budget process, but we'll be moving forward with it. Also on the budget front, Mayor Moran and I have been invited to take part in a virtual meeting organized by Region 19. We will be joining our colleagues in Willington and Ashford to talk about the school district's 22-23 budget, and basically give each town an opportunity to talk about its budget priorities and constraints, and as well as hear about relevant legislative issues from members of our state legislative delegation. I'm very happy to announce, I know I already sent out a written announcement to this effect, and it's been widely broadcast, but happy to announce that we have a permanent Director of Parks and Recreation, Jay O'Keefe, who has been the longtime Assistant Director of Parks and Recreation under Kurt, and has been the acting director for a 14-month period, has been named as the permanent director. We did have a very strong candidate pool, multiple rounds of interviews, thorough vetting of the candidates, and there were definitely some impressive people in the group, but nobody more so than Jay. And Jay obviously has tremendous institutional knowledge and institutional memory, having worked with Mansfield Parks and Recreation for as long as he has. And so I have every faith and confidence in Jay's ability to successfully lead the department and Mansfield Parks and Rec, and of course our community center moving forward. The challenges are many, the opportunities are many, but we're gonna be rolling up our sleeves and really getting after it in early 2022. I wanted to just issue a slight mea culpa. Not sure what happened, but I did want to let you know that there were a couple updates in my written report, that for whatever reason, the new content that I prepared didn't get included, and that includes updates on the construction of the new elementary school and the updates in the facilities section. So I will reissue my report to make sure that you have the latest and greatest on those two fronts. But as far as the new school goes, just want to let folks know that soon work will begin on quote unquote more indoor elements, things that are weather appropriate, actions or constructions appropriate to be done during the winter months. And at some point too, there will be more overlapping work being done by tradespeople. So more construction of different variety happening concurrently, and construction, the speed of construction should really start to accelerate at that time. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we continue on the critical path as we are informed by our project manager, architect, and contractor. Want to make sure that everybody knows, including our residents, know that Town Council has authorized the expansion of the Helping Hands program, now including residents of Ashford, Chaplin, Coventry, Wellington, and Wyndham. Our staff has reached out to Mansfield child care providers to advise them of the change, and we're in the process of reaching out to human services departments in these communities to advise them of the program. And as of the last day of December, we were providing assistance to 42 households with a total of 82 individuals. And we continue to accept applications for assistance with food and child care needs from residents impacted by the pandemic. And there's a lot of information on the town's website under the COVID assistance tab. Youth services, the council knows our Youth Services Bureau has been working with its counterparts in Wellington and Ashford on a regional youth restorative justice or diversion program. And we have a fully fleshed out working version of a memorandum of understanding, memorandum of agreement that town attorney has provided substantial input in the crafting of. We're comfortable with it. A draft of that document, I believe, has just been recently shared with our counterparts in Wellington and Ashford, and we will wait their feedback. And assuming that on a staff to staff level, things are looking good, this will start going before the respective governing bodies for review and ratification. And so the council can expect to see that at its next meeting on January 24th. And we obviously had a pretty substantial winter storm. I usually poke fun at all the worry about winter storms in Connecticut, but hey, we got a foot and a foot anywhere, including New Hampshire, where I was. That's a real storm. And so our DPW worked, in my opinion, fast and furious in that event. They were out, I believe, 1 a.m. They pre-treated. They began plowing. They were able to get through upwards of 14 inches of snow in 10 hours, and ultimately did the downtown snow cleanup, including hauling away of the snow within 18 hours of the start of the event. So that's certainly a more aggressive timeline than is dictated by our winter snow removal policy as a town. And so I commend our department for its swift action and a lot of positive feedback pouring in from social media and email, thanking our department for the work they did on Friday into Saturday. Last couple notes, Department of Public Works is also preparing to hire a spring semester intern, Yukon upper level undergraduate with background and expertise in sustainability to help the town with its efforts to get recertified under Sustainable CT. We received our silver level certification in 2019, and so our current certification, which is good for 3 years, will expire in August of 22, and so it'll be a priority for the spring semester for us to find the right intern to help us pull together all the materials we need to re-up our certification. And the rest you can read about in my written report.
Thank you. Questions for the town manager? I would comment that after I made my way out of my unplowed driveway, it was really amazing to find cleared roads on Friday before noon. And we did better than Willimantic as far as I could tell. So pretty impressive. Any other questions for the town manager? All right, hearing none. The next item on our agenda is reports and comments of council members. Does anybody have any report or comment? Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I was appointed to the council almost 3 months ago, and I would like the town website to reflect that. There's no mention of me on the town council website whatsoever.
I'm sure that could be taken care of.
Yep, we'll have staff correct that immediately.
Thank you.
Usually we have a photograph as well. Mr. Coleman, you'll probably have to arrange with Ms. Chain to have a photograph.
That's fine.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Chain, that you need to put him on our website?
I'll coordinate with the manager's office, Madam Mayor. That's not something that I would typically do, but as Ryan stated, it'll be taken care of.
Good, thank you. Any other reports or comments? Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, I have a comment on the minutes of both the special meeting and the regular town meeting. The minutes, I think, should reflect comments on motions. I don't see the comments on motions that are made reflected in the minutes. I'd like to see that in the minutes.
We don't normally put comments in the minutes. The minutes are merely a reflection of our formal actions.
Okay, so nothing about motions.
No, we do not put comments or report the members' discussion. We only report motions made and the outcomes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. You and I need to sit down and have a talk. There are a number of things like that I wanted to share with you. So we'll get together maybe this week sometime. All right, if there are no other comments, the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. It includes 2 sets of minutes and appointments to town committees. Would somebody move the consent agenda? Mr. Shuren?
So moved.
So moved. Is there a second? Mr. Shaken? Any discussion of the motion on accepting the consent agenda? Mr. Ausberger?
I have to abstain as I didn't attend either of these meetings.
Okay. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from the consent agenda motion with the exception of Mr. Ausberger? Mr. Kotchenberger?
I missed our early December meeting.
Okay. Is there anybody who wished, Mr. Frattoni?
Yeah, and I missed the special meeting of December 20th.
All right, Ms. Chain, can our minutes reflect the fact that these 3 council members are abstaining from the vote on the particular meetings that they have missed?
Point of procedure, Mayor, I think if we are going to split the baby, we need to split the consent agenda off. We need to pull those items from the consent agenda and vote on them individually, or we can have council members abstain from the acceptance of the entire consent agenda.
I would rather not have people abstaining from appointments to boards and commissions. However, I do understand the peculiarity of this. All right, if you wish to abstain from the entire motion. Is there anybody who wishes to vote in opposition to the consent agenda? All right. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
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 All right. So
Aye.
you notice there are 3 abstentions, Ms. Chang.
Yes, all set. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Next item is old business, continuing council and council meetings, virtual meetings. Mr. Aylesworth.
Yeah, as you all know, the council back in the fall, it probably says in the agenda item summary when that initial discussion happened, November 8th, I guess. Things were looking a little bit better at that time in terms of positivity rates. And I think there was optimism that come the new year, there would be seemingly little resistance or little counter argument for reinstating in-person meetings. But unfortunately, as obviously anybody who's alive right now and is paying attention knows, we're going through a rather epically bad point or period of positivity rates, and more than double the positivity rates that we were experiencing this time last year. And so it certainly would seem that the council would be well advised to continue to meet virtually until the situation undergoes some substantial improvement. So to that effect, there is a draft motion in your packet, but based on some feedback I received, I think to the extent that it's the council's desire to continue to meet virtually, I think you guys have a revised motion in mind. Tony, you're muted, or Madam Mayor, you're muted.
Ms. Berthelot, and you are also muted. Thank you.
I'll make the motion. Again, just as was pointed out, it's a little bit different than the one that's in the packet. Move effective January 10, 2022, to have the town council, council committees, and advisory committees and commissions continue to utilize remote meetings until such time as it is determined that positivity rates in Mansfield and Tolland County broadly fall into what is deemed to be a reasonable risk category.
Do we have a second to Ms. Berthelot's motion? Mr. Osberger? Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Ms. Berthelot, do you want to speak to your motion? Mr. Shuren, just let
Sure.
Ms. Berthelot speak to her motion and I'll get to you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor. It's obviously very, very important that as soon as we can, we return to in-person meetings. It's a function of our democracy that our community has access to us as easily as possible. But in the same vein, we need to respect that continue to be in a very dangerous pandemic. And there are a lot of things we don't really have full knowledge about. That's why, in part, the motion that I made, the language has shifted just a tad. It may be, we don't really know in the future what exactly should trigger us going back to in-person hearings. We do know that this is something we need to actively work. We need to monitor. We need to work with Eastern Highlands Health District to understand when it's safe. And as soon as it really is safe, of course, probably with a 2-week window, we'll return to in-person hearings. But for the time being, it only makes sense to keep our community safe to stay virtual.
Thank you. Mr. Shuren.
I support the intent of the motion. My concern question, we have words, it is determined. Should we not be clear about who does the determining?
Ms. Berthelot, you wish to respond?
I'm happy to respond. Since we, the town council, have the only authority to make this decision, I think it's implied. We'll have to meet again, and I mean the governor's orders, obviously, whatever they happen to be, but within that, within those parameters, we're the group. So the implication, it's implied that we'll be the ones who make that decision. Just like we're making it now.
I'd be more comfortable if we said is determined by the town council with those words.
Are you requesting a friendly amendment to the motion as it is made?
I am.
Is there a second to Mr. Shuren's motion? Mr. Kotchenberger, you second? Okay, Mr. Shuren, can you state your motion for the town clerk?
To add the words by the town council after the words determined, after the word determined in the motion.
Ms. Berthelot, you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Okay, then we don't need to vote on it. The motion has been amended. Further comment on the motion? Mr. Katzenberger.
I also support the motion. I think Terry's comments that she mentioned up front about the importance of in-person meetings, I would propose, and I don't have the exact language with me, I would propose as a friendly amendment that language or something similar to it be included within this motion, either at the very beginning or at the end. Because I think it is important that we acknowledge, that we assure the town that in person, we're not going to virtual indefinitely. And that's our intent to return when it is safe to do so. I don't remember the precise language again that Terry used, but I liked it.
I would assume that was part of the motion, that staying virtual is the exception to the rule, not the rule.
I didn't understand that, was it?
Yes, because we have declared that we will meet virtually until it is safe to return.
Oh, correct. But I mean, the prefatory comments about that, the importance of, to our town government, to the town of Mansfield, of meeting in person, expressing clearly that that's the way we intend to meet as soon as it's safe to do so. I think there's all sorts of stories and rumors, not so much about us, but about what will be virtual in the future, what will not be. And I think it is certainly our intent that we return face to face as soon as, when it's safe to do so. And I think that should be in the motion.
Mr. Shaken?
I think unless one of my colleagues would like to compose a resolution and adopt a multifaceted statement, I think the council's intent is clearly encapsulated in the motion that Terry made, that we will continue virtually and only until it is safe for us to return in person as determined by us. I mean, that's what we're voting on. And I think what my opinion, at least what Terry did, was remove a hard and fast statistic, a statistic that may not ever be achievable for Tallinn County, and instead leave it up to us as to when to come back. And I think that's a fair thing for us to vote on, because that's exactly what it is that we're going to do.
Could we read the motion again?
Ms. Chang, do you have the motion to read, please?
Yes, move effective January 10th, 2022 to have the town council and council committees and advisory committees and commissions continue to utilize remote meetings until such time as it is determined by the town council that positivity rates in Mansfield and Tallinn County broadly fall into what is deemed to be a reasonable risk category.
I think, Mr. Katzenberger, that the motion assumes that this is an exceptional situation due to a real danger, that it is not the normal state of the council.
I don't think this is necessarily a big deal. I don't think it does. I don't doubt that that's our intent, but I don't think it states that at all. And I think clarity here, not because of any statements that we've made, the town council has made, but because of the constant shift in terms of businesses, government, closed, unclosed. I think it's important that we make, not as the primary statement, but that we make it clear. We could just say, we could say something like that. This is, the exception. But I think we should make clear that we intend to return to in person when we can. And it's not a criticism of the current motion. I think it's fine, but I don't think the current motion makes that clear.
Do you have an amendment to propose?
I said we could we could add a sentence at the end, because I don't think it's not the whole point of the motion by any means. We could add a sentence, a sentence at the end, which states something to the effect, and I can work on it a minute while people discuss or move on, but which states that the town council recognizes the importance of in-person meetings
Is that your
as
proposed
an essential
amendment?
part.
to the
Well, yes,
motion?
I don't, as I said at the start, I don't have language right at hand, but I can quickly craft it. Yes, but my suggestion would be as a proposed, a friendly amendment.
All right, I do believe we need the language.
So how about the town, at the end, new sentence, the town council recognizes the importance of in-person meetings to our town government and the people of Mansfield, and will return to them when safe.
Is there a second to Mr. Katzenberger's amendment to the motion? Mr. Osberger seconds. All right, Mr. Katzenberger, do you wish to speak further to your motion?
No, I think only to the effect that I think there is a fair amount of confusion, again, not linked necessarily to whether we open or not, at least not that I'm aware of, or are planning to return in person. But I think there is considerable confusion, understandably, around the country about when and where, and some of that can't be avoided because we don't know exactly when. But I think it's important that we make clear to the people of Mansfield, to ourselves, if we agree, that we will be in person and that we're not contemplating future full town council meetings being, always being available virtually, but not being conducted in person, virtually.
Not being conducted.
Not being conducted virtually as opposed to in person.
My own thoughts about this is there's going to be an element of virtuality in our town meetings for a very long time because it solves some very real problems. For example, it allows staff to do their 20-minute participation at 9 o'clock from their homes rather than having to sit in their offices for the entire evening in order to make a 20-minute presentation. So my guess is that as we go forward, we will be utilizing virtual meetings for certain purposes, but the hope is that we can return as the town council as a whole to an in-person meeting.
Oh, and that's what I meant. That's right. I mean, that's better said because, of course, there's many advantages to having people who have brief appearances or whatever to participate. I simply meant what you just said, Mayor.
Mr. Shuren.
Can I suggest that maybe at our next meeting, the Personnel Committee take its hand at trying to draft a resolution that covers all of the things that we've talked about as clearly as possible, rather than do something a little bit on the fly right now?
I think we need the motion that's on the floor right now.
Okay.
Because it allows us to continue to meet virtually. If you may recall, we intended to return to in-person in January, and I personally would seriously oppose a return to in-person meeting at this time.
I agree with that. What I was saying is the modifications as suggested by Peter and some other things we could work on. But this resolution now for tonight, pass as is.
I believe that Peter's statement, the one sentence that committing us to an in-person meeting, could stand as an amendment. And I believe it's on the floor.
Okay.
So we are now discussing Mr. Katzenberger's amendment. Mr. Shaken.
I'm fine with Mr. Katzenberger's amendment. My general thought as a council is that we have the ability to set policy for ourselves in the town, and that means that we have the ability to set it as we choose at the moment that we choose it. And so while we could adopt a resolution that set out standards, I think if we had chosen to adopt that resolution in November instead of just scheduling in-person meetings in January, we'd have been at the same place we are today, which is with an unprecedented situation, changing our minds about what we had originally talked about. So I would prefer, as we've done throughout this pandemic, to continue to take the facts as they come to us and make a decision about what's safe for counselors and for staff based on the facts in our community and among ourselves. And so I don't think anyone's disagreeing about staying virtual for now. I don't think anyone on the council intends to stay virtual for forever. And And I also think that it's very possible that for the next several years during the winter, we're going to go virtual because we're going to be dealing with significant COVID outbreaks in the United States for the next few years. And I think the reason that Terry was ambiguous in her amendment to the proposed motion is because there's a lot of factors we don't know about. We don't know at what point this will just become endemic and it'll be safe for us to be contracting COVID here and there. We don't know at which point vaccines will be available for children under 5, making some staff with young kids more comfortable being in person. There's a number of things that might make us next year tolerate 200 cases per 100,000 as an acceptable risk, whereas today we feel that's unacceptable. And I think that's why the ambiguity is actually important. And I wouldn't want to set a strict policy today without knowing what tomorrow will bring.
Does that mean you would support or oppose Mr. Katzenberger's amendment?
I think Peter's amendment is fine. We all intend to go back in person when we determine it's the right thing to do.
Okay, then I'm going to ask for a vote on Mr. Katzenberger's amendment. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from Mr. Katzenberger's amendment? Is there anybody who wishes to vote no on Mr. Katzenberger's amendment? Then the amendment has been adopted unanimously. Now, a vote on the motion, the original motion as amended. There are 2 amendments. One of them puts the words town council in as a determiner, and the other states our general policy of wishing to return to in-person when possible. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this motion? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative on this motion? Then I rule that the motion has been adopted unanimously. Thank you, everybody. I think this was an important statement and a disappointing need, but nonetheless a need. All right, the next item is the COVID-19 update. Mr. Aylesworth and Mr. Miller.
I would invite Mr. Miller to provide his regular update, and then we can have a little bit of discussion about distribution events.
Good evening,
Welcome.
Madam Chairperson and the rest of the council. We'll start with a little data, as we always do. So as of for the 2-week period ending January 1st, 2022, the town of Mansfield saw a total count of 174 cases. That count was for the first of those 2 weeks at 61. For the second of those 2 weeks, jumped up to 113 cases. By comparison to the health district as a whole, we had for the first week of that 2-week period 278 cases, and then for the second week in that single week, we exceeded our 7-day health district record, so to speak, significantly, and that number went up over 100%, jumped up to 600 cases district-wide in 1 week. And those significant numbers are reflected in case rates for that 2-week period, or for the previous week. The case rate for the town of Mansfield was 26 cases per 100,000, and then it jumped up in the second week to 48 cases per 100,000. And by comparison, you recall that communities considered in the high category pursuant to the state health department's response framework if they exceed 15 cases. So Mansfield is substantially higher than that. That being said, among all the health district towns, relative to the other towns, it's the lowest. The other thing I want to point out is Mansfield's positivity rate. Again, for that first week of that 2-week period, it's at 8%, and then it jumped up for the second week to 14.9%. And that's comparison to, and this is a single day statewide positivity rate, so it's not exactly comparable, but it gives you some perspective. Today, Connecticut was at 23.68%. And then looking at the CDC's measure for risk of transmission in the community, Holland County, as I've said before in the past, is the lowest kind of geographic area that they measure at the county level. And they measured it as of January 10th at 1,019 cases per 100,000. Again, comparing to the CDC's threshold for the high data category, which starts at 100 cases. So Collin County's 10 times that threshold. The health district has observed an extreme amplification of cases within our population during that 2-week period, and that is essentially the same rates that have been seen statewide too. Our area is no exception. All 8 counties, as measured by the CDC, are well above 1,000. In fact, Collin County is at the lowest at around 1,000 cases per 100,000. All the other counties are higher than that. The other, I wanted to also talk a little bit about just kind of to update the council that the CDC has put out new guidance for isolation and quarantine. Prior to, they put that guidance out just prior to the new year. It's prior to that, was generally known that a quarantine period or an isolation period, depending on specific circumstances, was 10 days. The CDC reduced that in most circumstances to 5 days of isolation and/or quarantine, with an additional 5 days of strict adherence to masking protocols. That has, in response to that, the Department of Public Health has modified and updated their pre-K to 12 isolation and quarantine guidance to align with that. The DPH did that just prior to school opening. Last week on Monday, and so local health departments and school districts were scrambling to implement those new updates. While I don't want to speak out of turn, I am aware in talking with Kelly Lyman, superintendent of Mansfield Public Schools, that given that this new update guidance by the state health department and the Department of Education was optional, at least for this first week of the new school year, Mansfield Public School Systems opted to defer the new guidance and stick with the old guidance for the time being, pending kind of a weekly evaluation of where the local case counts are at. And I have been in communication with Kelly recently about next week. I know that she and her leadership team are looking at what to do for next week. On the vaccination front, the health district, well, let me start off with a few numbers. The town of Mansfield continues to do reasonably well relative to other health district communities and the state of Connecticut. With each month that goes by, the percent of fully vaccinated individuals in the population inches up 81% currently, compared to the health district total 73% and statewide at 70%. Of course, there's the meaning of that has changed, obviously, with the advent of and the approval of the FDA and CDC of boosters. Unfortunately, there's not really good information and data on the percent booster coverage. There's been challenges with collecting that data at both the state and federal level, because many boosters are reported by vaccine providers as first doses. And so as a result, though the percent of population receiving first doses tends to be overreported, and the percent of population receiving boosters tends to be underreported. So that challenge continues today. In most split out age categories, Mansfield tends to be ahead of the curve with respect to health district population totals and the state of Connecticut. I know that, council's probably aware that the CDC, the FDA, and the ACIP, which is the arm of the CDC that provides recommendations on vaccine, has approved boosters essentially for those 12 and older. They've modified that. It used to be 6 months out from your primary series. Now it's 5 months out for both Pfizer and Moderna, and 2 months out from J&J. And then more recently, the ACIP approved what they consider an extra primary shot for those 5 to 11 who are immunocompromised. They haven't quite yet approved boosters per se for that age group. But at some point in time, I suspect that they will. For now, it's a primary third additional dose for those who are severely immunocompromised. And I just want to take this opportunity to remind the council and the residents that may be listening that the vaccine is still the primary and most important tool, one of the most important tools that public health has to combat this pandemic. Those who are unvaccinated or not fully vaccinated are 3.5 times more likely to get sick, and 17 times more likely to pass as a result of a COVID-related illness. So, vaccine, despite a lot of publicity related to breakthrough cases, remains still an important tool in combating this pandemic and preventing at least severe outcomes for those individuals who are vaccinated. And for our part, the health district continues to do weekly clinics. We continue to have adult clinics for 12 and older on Mondays from 9 to 1 at the town hall, and then we have our pediatric clinics for those 5 to 11 on Thursdays from 2 to 6. We also continue to do homebound. We're administering vaccine to, on average, 2 to 4 individuals weekly throughout the health district, and so that program continues. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but right now I know Ryan and his team has been working on behalf of the town of Mansfield to get self-test kits out to the community. As I'm sure many of you are aware, that the governor's office and the state allocated a significant number of self-test kits to both municipalities and school districts throughout the state of Connecticut, with still more to come, at least for school districts. And along with many hundreds of thousands or millions of N95 masks. And so I'll defer that for the time being and participate in that discussion with Ryan and his team. I did also want to note that I spoke briefly with Dr. Ayer from University of Connecticut Student Health and Wellness. They're obviously in the throes of preparing for the upcoming fall semester. By now, everybody understands that they have delayed the in-person learning component of the semester, at least until the end of January. If and when they do start up again, certainly they'll start up the weekly surveillance testing as they've done in the past, and also their standard isolation quarantine protocols that they've had in place in the past year or so. At some point in time, I suspect the university will make a decision about whether further delay is necessary. I suspect that if the positivity rate remains extremely high, that the university will have to think very carefully about what the start of the semester may look like. And then finally, I just want to bring to the council's attention, if you're not already, that last week, January 5th, the health district issued a statement, call to action, in effect during the month of January. We requested in the strongest terms possible that all businesses and residents take direct steps to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission in your business, in your home, and in your place of work. We've never seen counts this high before. We're anticipating that they may go up in the next week or so. And so now is the time, as both individuals and entities and organizations, to act in an affirmative manner, take direct steps to do what you can, get vaccinated, and if eligible, get boosted, avoid large crowds, social distance whenever possible, stay home when you're sick, and wear a mask whenever you're going to be in proximity to others. And then most importantly, we're asking people to please be courteous during this period. It is not easy for any of us. And so I think patience and understanding are essential at this time while our communities are battling through this. So with that, I'll leave it to Madam Chairperson, Madam Mayor, and I'd be glad to answer any questions, or we can move on to the testing piece of this, whatever the mayor chooses.
Mr. Shern.
Just a quick question. Given the increase in the number of people self-testing, do you have a sense of how that affects our calculation of positivity rates?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. I think the self-tests are not part of the numbers. Yeah. And there's hundreds of thousands and a couple million essentially of self-tests that are going to be out there in the end when the governor's done with complete this initiative. And so I think it's reasonable to conclude that for every positive test counted in our numbers, that there's 2 or 3 other positive individuals out there. A better way of characterizing it are either individuals who are positive through a self-test or haven't tested at all, are symptomatic and likely positive. So for every individual test there that's reported, there are 2 or 3 other individuals out there that I'm sure that are positive with the test.
The real number is probably a little higher than the ones that we...
1,500 to 2,400 people. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks, and thanks, Rob. I can't help but sort of comment on, when comparing us to the other towns, at least that we have data on, which are not necessarily our direct neighbors, because the health district doesn't cover Wyndham. But nevertheless, our vaccination rates have consistently been higher, and certainly we've in Mansfield maintained since August really an indoor mask mandate on our local businesses, which, of course, you don't have a police force at your disposal, Rob, and so it has been something that is an honor system more than anything. But nevertheless, I've noticed visiting businesses in Mansfield compared with visiting them in Tolland or going to Buckland and Manchester, a much higher proportion of people choosing to comply with our mandate versus voluntary guidance in other communities. So I'm just looking from a policy perspective, is it working? Is there any? I also notice our data in terms of positivity rates consistently seems to, while high, be lower than in some of our surrounding communities, lower than the health district's totals, always. And I'm just curious if there's any conclusion that you're comfortable reaching as a public health professional about the effectiveness when you look at a sort of closed data set like the health district's population.
So I don't have any specific empirical data on that point, but my observations would be that certainly based on the science that we know to be true related to masking and face coverings as a mitigation measure, and that it is an effective mitigation measure, especially at a community-based level, and that combined with also the fact that the university population obviously factors very much into the demographics and the dynamics of the Mansfield population. I think that that those two factors definitely influence the lower positivity rate and the lower incident case rates that they see for the Mansfield population. In the case of what I'm referring to specifically is the vaccination coverage percentages, and also I think the community-based interventions that this body has imposed have definitely have a positive impact on the health outcomes of this community, and I commend you for that. There are a number of communities in Eastern Connecticut in particular that have not taken this approach, and you see it in the data. And I'm not going to call any individual communities out, but it's definitely your efforts are definitely evidenced here, and the health district appreciates your partnership in this effort.
Thanks. I had a second question about pediatric vaccines. So we met a month ago, Rob, which was about a month after pediatric 5 to 11-year-olds had become eligible for the vaccine. And we had a conversation then about coverage rates being at about 35% in Mansfield, which is higher than the state average a little bit. And I can't help but notice that trying to find the right page of the report here, the most recent one, we've gone up 2% since in the last month, which seems like an awfully small, it seems like we're going up 1% every 2 weeks or so. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that is happening in other places in the state or the country that might help us accelerate that rate.
So let me just note that it's, that's 9% higher than the health district total population, and 15% higher than statewide population. And I think part of the challenge with that age group is, there's definitely an air of cautiousness among many parents in our communities, and it's not the same as an adult and individual kind of making a decision for themselves. And so my sense is, in talking with superintendents around the state, is that there's a real resistance among families, a certain segment of the families about getting the vaccine and waiting, in essence, to see for more data to come forward, to feel more comfortable about what the data means to them. Just anecdotally, I have my own personal experience within my own family. A sibling of mine and a niece or nephew, the parents were resistant initially to get my niece or nephew vaccinated, and of course I spent being the dutiful local health director of the family, went through all the information with them, but they were concerned about the fact that there's a so-called lack of data out there. There's only a few months of data. Sure, it's gone through the formal process and everything, and it really wasn't until an individual piece of data came out that really triggered them, that really caused them to go over and to kind of crest that threshold to make the decision. Something came out as it related to diabetes is what it was. It kind of triggered them as parents. Another data point that finally caused them to pull the trigger and say, okay. And I think that's true for many parents out there. They're just, it's a challenging situation for them right now. In terms of what we can do, we continue to work very closely with the schools. They have a direct connection, lines of communication. We've been coordinating with our school districts to get information out there, providing them lists of local vaccine providers to do pediatric shots, updating them. They've been pushing them out with whatever other information that we have and that they have. And so it's a tough nut. It's a tough nut to crack.
Mr. Miller, I would comment for those who haven't noticed in the chat, Ms. Evans comments that the Mansfield Middle School policy has been changed this evening.
There you go.
So people should take a look at that. Any other questions for Mr. Miller? Well, as long as we're talking about family anecdotes, I will point out that a number of significant family events in my family, having to do particularly with several funerals, had to be delayed because the members of the family who are vaccinated will not assemble with people who are not vaccinated, and rather than cause the conflict, everything is being pushed off to another time, which is unfortunate. If everybody got vaccinated, we could probably have some of these gatherings in a way that was safe and didn't generate the concerns that I'm seeing. Mr. Shuren?
This may be a question for Mr. Deneen. We as a town can require masks in public places. We have no authority, or do we, to require that people engaged in certain activities, hairdressers, for example, be vaccinated? Is that correct? We do not have that.
Ellsworth, Mr. Miller?
So vaccine mandate for the community.
I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything.
I was thinking Kevin might. There he is. He's coming through. Okay.
No,
I'm not aware of any authority for the town at municipal level to mandate vaccines versus masks. No on the vaccines.
There's no prohibition either.
But we're only as a municipality authorized to do those things that are statutorily or granted elsewhere.
Okay. Mr. Shaken, you had your hand up?
I was going to answer that question.
Okay.
Mayor.
All right. I mean, there have been states, of course, where state legislatures have expressly prohibited communities from making either mask or vaccine mandates. So fortunately, we are allowed to order masks, but we are not allowed to order vaccines yet. On the other hand, a lot of business organizations are recommending to their members that they have more stringent rules within their own businesses. But clearly, there are still places where some people are vaccinated and others aren't. Any other questions for Mr. Miller? Mr. Miller, I must say the numbers are still very confusing. For example, early on you said we have a 48 per 100,000 incident rate, and yet we have 170 some cases. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, it's a rate, Madam Mayor. So I mean, I could spend some time
per 100,000.
Per 100,000, right? And so
it's a
rate per 100,000. So 48 was. Let's see, which number are you citing specifically? I'm not sure I ever said 48. I said 61 in 1 week and 113 in another week.
But the rate is now 48.8%, 48.8 per 100,000.
That's correct. The math does work.
More than 48 cases and many fewer than 100,000. That's
well, it's a 14-day rolling average.
okay.
Okay, it's a 14-day rolling average. So that's so kind of the simplest terms. 48 is the average on a daily basis over that 14 days.
So given our actual incidence rate, we should see the rate of incidence rise as this 161 people get counted into the next calculation.
Well, it did. It did rise. It went from the first week over that 14 days. So I'm also providing you. So I'm providing you 2 14-day rates over a 2-week period. One is, over that first week, it was at 26 cases per 100,000. And the second week, it jumped up to 48. And you're right, it probably will go up again.
Yes. So
For this upcoming week.
We're only at the tip of this at this point. I was talking with my son in Brooklyn. Their rate per 100,000 is 476. So it's possible that we are going to see a much more significant rate increase as the New York cases move into Connecticut and into Eastern Connecticut.
Well, if I may, Madam Mayor, to add to your confusion, these rates per 100,000 are calculated differently from one public health authority to the other. So that's why the CDC's rate is over 1,000 for Tallinn County, and it's for Mansfield, or and the DPH calculated it at 1,000. I'm sorry, the CDC calculated 1,000. And the DPH's rate is probably, I don't have it with me, but significantly lower than that. And that's because, again, these public health authorities calculate their rates slightly different. That's why you get different numbers. And so I'm sorry for the confusion, but that is the explanation for it.
All right. Am I right in assuming it's only going to get worse before it gets better?
That's my feeling, Madam Mayor. That's what the State Health Department and other experts in the field have been saying. So I think we're looking at another couple of weeks of increases and hopefully some decreases after that.
Good. Any further questions from Mr. Shakin?
I have to say, I agree with the mayor. It's gotten somehow more confusing and harder to understand as the pandemic is drawn on, which is, I will confess, not how I anticipated things would go, given how confusing and hard to understand everything was almost 2 years ago. And it would be most helpful if some singular public health authority could say, this is the rate that everyone goes off of. And it could also help inform people in the community. Well, that means that if I go to the grocery store and am around 100 people, I can reasonably expect 24 of them, 19 of them, 43 of them to have COVID right now. And make risk determinations accordingly. Or if I'm meeting 10 family, it's more than likely that 2 of them have COVID right now, et cetera. But unfortunately, that's not how things are. I know it's out of your control.
Yep. Well, I share your concern. Unfortunately, we don't have an epidemiologist on staff, and our agency relies on the State Health Department for much of this data and its interpretation. And it's unfortunate. I completely agree with the notion that it seems like, at least at the federal level, they could set a standard on how to calculate rates that could be followed at the state level and at the local level. And for whatever reason, that just doesn't happen.
All right. Mr. Aylesworth, I believe you wanted to talk about distribution of test kits.
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And obviously this is an important topic, but I'm going to try to move quickly because I want to be mindful of the fact that our guests from Wrtd, this is their second crack at trying to get before the council. And we've been at this a while. So we did a mass distribution event for home rapid test kits and N95 masks a week ago. This distribution came to be sort of out of the ashes of what was a failed attempt by the state to allocate large quantities of test kits and masks to municipalities earlier the prior week. Obviously, this was much reported on, and a number of high-profile people ended up with some egg on their face. But I believe it was New Year's Eve day, so last Friday, or a week ago Friday, we received word that a large amount of test kits had been secured by the state, and that they were making every effort to get those out to regional distribution pods as quickly as possible. So on basically the New Year's weekend, Adam Libros, our emergency management director and fire marshal, took the time, which was obviously much needed to do, very important work, go down to Mohegan Sun and pick up our distribution. And basically we organized in 48 or 72 hours, whatever it worked out to be, an unprecedented distribution event as quickly as possible. That's not to say that the event went off without some hiccups. There was definitely some lessons learned. We elected to use the middle school because of all the locations in town that we considered. It seemed to provide the best circular access, allow vehicles, a substantial amount of vehicles to queue, and a substantial distance for vehicles to queue before they spilled out onto a major transportation artery. Demand being as intense as it was, that still happened. Vehicles wound their way down the full length of Clover Mill from the middle school to 195 and at least as far back, I believe, as 89 or Warrenville Road. But this really was a team effort. Obviously, emergency management, but also our firefighters, EMTs, DPW, resident trooper's office, staff in my office helping with communication, answering resident questions. So it was unprecedented distribution. We had 1,890 kits to distribute. We gave them out 2 per household. And while nothing was perfect, I do consider it to be a success based on one key metric. And that key metric is while the lines got long and the wait was long, I know there was a fair amount of public feedback on social media and other media as a result of that backlog of vehicles. Everybody who was in line, the car line, received kits. Nobody got turned away that waited for the duration. Nobody walked away empty-handed. There were vehicles that arrived late as cars were pulling freely in off Clover Mill that hadn't been part of the original line. We did run out, and so those cars that were kind of late getting there did only walk away with N95 masks, but nobody who soldiered through the line walked away empty-handed. So for that, I think it was a success. I guess pivoting into future planning events, I want the council to know that we had and have been talking extensively internally about what to do with our next distribution of kits. We received late this past week 1,710 kits, so quantity slightly less than what we received for the first distribution. And we had another meeting today, and the emphasis from the state, the guidance from the state, is to prioritize vulnerable populations. That's the guidance to municipalities with their next distribution. And so we're still finalizing exact numbers, but of our roughly 1,700 kits right now, I don't think these numbers are going to change an awful lot, but just broad strokes, I want to give you a sense of what we're looking to do. Nearly 1,000 of those kits right now are earmarked for organizations that deal directly with vulnerable populations of all flavors, for lack of a better term, all vulnerable populations that we serve both locally and as part of our region. And so I think that upwards of 1,000 of our 1,700 is a very robust number with which to do that. We're also looking to help out our public schools, our daycares, and our business community. And so what that all amounts to is, at present, and being reasonable and conservative with the total numbers we're looking to distribute to these various groups and subgroups, it appears we're on pace to fully utilize our 1,710 kits without a general public distribution, a second general public distribution at this time. Obviously, there is a general public benefit by more and more kits getting out in the public or used by the public and these vulnerable populations that we'll serve. But right now, based on the small residual that we're anticipating will be left once these targeted distributions are done, we are not presently anticipating, based on this allocation anyway, another mass distribution event. Obviously, if the state comes out with a third wave of allocations and the town benefits from that, that'll be another animal entirely, and we'll plan accordingly as a result. But right now, that's where things stand, and we're looking to basically over the next 24, 48 hours, get the kits that we have and 95 masks, but the kits that we have, the home test kits that we have, out to the various groups that we've identified. And so I'm happy to share additional information with council members. I can provide a table of where these kits are going. I don't think that's necessarily the best use of our time here tonight in the interest of time, but in broad brush strokes, that's where things stand right now. And I want to publicly thank, I know I said it's a team effort, and it really has been, but I want to take a moment, just a second or two, and really thank Adam Libros for his personal leadership on this. This has been incredibly challenging, and I know, Adam, this is what you do when you're in emergency management. You adapt to various situations, and this is certainly a very unusual situation, and one for which there's not really a playbook established. But I just want to extend my personal thanks for Adam's wisdom and his stick-to-itiveness over the last week or two. He's really done yeoman's work, and we've all benefited from that.
Thank you. I want to add my thanks to Mr. Libros and also to the firefighters and police, state police, who assisted in that effort. Mr. Shaken and I were standing by as we watched the cars come through, and while people did have to wait for a long time before the line started moving, once the line started moving, it was really quick and well organized and efficient and smooth. Mr. Osberger?
Yeah, I'd have to mirror Ryan's sentiments. My discussion with other town leaders and legislators throughout the state is that pretty much everyone distributed everything the same way, despite the complaints from the public. And within that, it went very smooth, from what I could see.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Mr. Shaken?
Thanks. I'm glad to hear that we're following the state's guidance. I know not every municipality is, in reserving tests for vulnerable populations that may not have the means or ability to wait in line in the middle of the day on a weekday. I just, to the extent that there are future distributions from the state, which I am sure we are expecting to some degree at least, I think we need to set up some way to quickly and easily get them in the hands of people who might need them. I know the president just announced this evening, that health insurance will be reimbursing people for moving forward for up to 8 test kits per month that they purchase. And so that will become free, as well as purchasing 500 million tests for the country, which is wonderful, if not a little bit late, at least for us in the Northeast. But in the interim, at least before those things go into effect, and while there is still a shortage in local stores, I hope that we can continue to push the state to allocate tests into all of our communities, and to the extent that they are pushing responsibility onto municipalities to distribute tests to vulnerable populations, that should, by every other way, be their charge. That we continue to push the state to handle those populations through better channels, more equipped on a day-to-day basis to deal with distributions, and to leave mass public distribution up to municipalities as they have. So thanks for your work on this. I know it hasn't been easy, and I await information about this next distribution, and hopefully more after that.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding the distribution of tests and masks? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. This was one of those things where municipal government stood up and did something in very short order, faster than people would have expected we could do, and we did it. Now we're moving on to new business. And the first item is the Wrtd Yukon Shuttle transit route redesign. Mr. Aylesworth, who do we have here from Wrtd? You're muted, Mr. Aylesworth.
I believe we have Linda Hateman, WRTD's executive director, and Philip, who is a senior planner with WRTD. I don't know if Philip, if this is your run of show or.
I'll let Linda do the introduction.
Okay, didn't see her coming off mute. So.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. I guess Linda just heard her camera and mic haven't been activated, so I don't know if she stepped away or not.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, hi everybody. This is Philip Johnson, and thank you for the time today. We are here today to present to you some of the route changes that we have proposed. They are over a year in development, and it started with a desire to improve the system, help with coordination, and minimize transfer times. The three essentials to help us do that are data-driven results, and the strategy to implement that is we got a transit model in the last year, so we're able to scientifically analyze different routes, different scenarios. The next is something called pulsing, which in transit means all of your buses come to the same point at the same time, and it eliminates the transfer time. That's the second, and the third is frequency. Our frequency leaves something to be desired in the system right now. So we're really taking a hard look at how can we provide more with the same budget constraints that we operate in. And those are the core elements. I'm going to share my screen here if I'm able to show a quick slideshow here. It's asking for permission. Let's see if I can do this quickly or not. Bear with me for just a moment here. I haven't given it permission yet. If I quit and rejoin, can that happen quickly to let me back in?
Usually it's pretty seamless.
Okay, I'll be back in a moment.
I don't know if Tasha's.
Yes, I'm here. So Linda came out and went back in. Linda, are you?
Yeah, I'm here now. For some reason, I could hear you guys, but I couldn't get back into the meeting. So I'm here. So Philip may have to do the same thing.
Okay.
So we appreciate your time. And, this is part of our process. We are trying to move towards some streamlined service improvements. Philip will go into a little more detail about that, but overall, what we're looking for is we're looking for improved headways, fewer ride times for people, more frequency. We can't add service at this time, so we're trying to, and Philip's done a great job with looking at what we're currently doing and seeing where there are areas of improvement or efficiencies. So I'll let him take over. Are you ready, Philip?
I believe so. We'll see if it works here. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So we boiled it down to two scenarios. It's gone through extensive outreach. We've talked to our drivers. We've talked to the public. We've ran this through the model, and we've had various outreach events. We have a workshop coming up in a couple of weeks as well, and then we'll have a public meeting. And our board has also been heavily involved with the development of this. Scenario A, on your left here, about the 65-minute pulse. That means all the buses come together at once. Right now, our frequency ranges from, I would say it's an average of about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. Our city bus in Willimantic is actually about 2 hours and 40 minutes on one of the lines. The Stores bus, the one that goes from Stores to Willimantic, it's about an hour and 40 right now. So we're looking at how can we get this down to about an hour. And that's really scenario A. Scenario B is instead coverage. So we would keep kind of the bread and butter of our existing routes, and we would instead extend the coverage area to the apartments further north of Yukon. In both scenarios, we're looking at our Norwich route. That's the one that goes down to the casino. In both scenarios, we're looking at adding a Norwich run. That's a takeaway in both of them. And then only in scenario A are we able to add Sunday service and run hunting launch, which is the route in Mansfield that runs around campus to the northwest sector of campus. Only in scenario A do we have the budget to add service, because I'll get more into that later. That's part of the introduction here. So here's Norwich. We'll get through this one quickly. The model shows there's a business park about halfway to the casino near the Norwich Transportation Center. And the model strongly supports going there on every run. Right now, we only go there by request. And we're able to add an existing run on Norwich by increasing our frequency in Willimantic. That's the catalyst here that lets it happen. Right now, the Norwich bus is going through town. The proposal is it would no longer go through town because City Bus is going to have potentially a 300 to 70% increase in frequency depending on where you are in town. So right now, City Bus, this is down in Willimantic. It's running it's running 11 runs, and it takes turns going between these two routes. And we're proposing a new loop route. It'll go one way. And the win here is we'll have the significant increase in frequency, and that should thereby increase ridership. The ridership is significant. The model has the numbers are extremely optimistic in the model. I don't think that I won't even bother mentioning it here. It's enough to make us very comfortable with the data that this should work. And all the way that we're able to do this is right now the route is detouring into a few places that cause significant time. Two of them, one of them's a hospital, one of them's Wyndham Heights, another one's over by the Gateway Plaza. We're really significantly detouring into properties, and it's causing a lot of something called deadhead, which is where you cover the same area twice. So we're really doing more with less in the City Bus, a significant amount of frequency all over town. The stores, this is, I imagine, the one the council will be the most interested in here. Stores bus, right now, we have an express bus that runs back and forth, a few in the morning, a few in the evening. Then we have something called the A and the C, which one of them goes to the senior center, one of them goes to Four Corners Holiday Mall, and it essentially takes turns doing that. We're about an hour and 45 minutes on these A and C runs. And then we have, as I said, a few of the express runs. Scenario A is really high frequency in between Willimantic and stores all day. So it would no longer go up to this Holiday Mall, Four Corners area. We'd cover that with a different route. It's doing more with less here. So high frequency Willimantic to stores. One turn it would take is going to the senior center, and then it would do mall. So on the way up, it would stop at the mall. It would go up to town to the National Denver Transportation Center, and then it would come back. Then the next time it came back to town, down to Willimantic, to our brand new shiny parking lot where we have our new transportation center launching soon. It would then come back to do the senior center run. And the data supports the high frequency run. And what this is really creating is a world where someone can really live without a car. With an hour and 45 minutes or 2.5 hours, you're it's not really an option to take a bus. This creates a transit network that's really creates a viable option to a personal vehicle. Scenario B, this is the different world that I was talking about earlier. This is where it would instead go further north of campus. There's the Walden Apartments up here is one of them. And in this world, we don't have any savings on our operating. In scenario B, in scenario A, we do have significant savings on our operating by making this, by not going up here anymore, the Holiday Mall Four Corners. We have significant operational savings. So in scenario A, we can then transfer those savings into some new service. One of them is Sunday. We don't have any service on Sunday right now. The world doesn't stop moving on Sunday. So this is possible on Sunday, intercity, going from Stores to Willimantic. And sorry, did I hear a question from somebody?
Not yet.
Okay. The other possibility or the other opportunity in scenario A is Hunting Lodge in the summer. Now, Hunting Lodge, as some people may or may not know, it's a route that covers the northwest quadrant of the Yukon campus, and that runs only during the academic year. What Wrtd is proposing to do is to run our own version of Hunting Lodge. It's really essentially more of like a Mansfield circulator, because the current Hunting Lodge does not go down to the senior center. In this proposal, it's more of like a Mansfield circulator where it'll cover a bit more of town, and we would run that in the summer, and we would run that during the breaks. So essentially, Hunting Lodge would become a year-round service, and that would give us this basically allows us to no longer go up to the Four Corners Holiday Mall on the Stores bus, because now they have great service. Hunting Lodge runs like 45 minutes an hour all day long. It's great service, high frequency service already. And that is my presentation in a nutshell. And if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer, and thank you so much for your time tonight.
All right, council members, questions for Mr. Johnson or for Ms. Happen? Where did everybody go?
I just want to say that I totally understand that the slides that Philip shared with everybody, you know, if I were you, I would be saying, oh, I'd really like a closer look at that. And I would have a lot more questions if I could just review that just a little bit. So this is a presentation, and Philip will be happy to share that with council for review. That, you know, this is not carved in stone right now. Presenting for your council is part of our process. That this is where we are accepting, you know, criticism and comments, and that we make changes where necessary. These are strictly proposals. So if you'd like, we can submit a copy to the council for review and make ourselves available for comments, you know, throughout the process.
I believe that council members have already received this in our packet. I have had the chance to take a really good look at it over the weekend. One of the questions that I have is, I understand that Wrtd is taking over Yukon bus service, and I don't understand what the connection between what you've shown us and that is.
So this, what Philip has shown you right now is an augment of what Wrtd is currently doing right now. The University of Connecticut shuttle service, as far as, and Philip is the planner, he's a shared planner for that, so, and he can comment on this, is that their routes and the way they want to serve campus is something that we will continue to coordinate with the University of Connecticut. Is that they still have their routes, the blue, the silver, the red, and all those. And those will stay the same, only, if they choose to change them. We are, WRTD is taking over management and personnel and maintenance, but really, you really shouldn't see any kind of change in anything. We're hoping this is going to be a real seamless transition, and it's primarily management is all.
That's unfortunate. I had dreams of a truly unified bus systems that would connect residential apartments with the campus, so that people wouldn't be necessarily having to walk on our public roads to get from one part of town to the other.
And I can't say, and where I came from, and part of why I came here was because of my affiliation with the University of North Texas in Denton. And we started out very much the same way, taking over the management of the university shuttle service. And, in the beginning, the university wanted to very much keep it segregated and a difference in identity. And over time, what we were able to do was to start developing routes and using buses in areas, like you just described. So I'm going to leave that open. Of course, it's a collaboration with the University of Connecticut, but in serving that, and I think Philip, you can chime in anytime here, is that efficiency is the key. So, when we go forward and we're looking at the routes on campus and the routes that we have as a system, we'll be looking at being able to serve the whole area, including the university, in the most efficient way possible. So, I'm leaning towards, what you just described. But of course, in the early stages of this collaboration, I wouldn't ever want to step on anybody's toes or project anything that they weren't comfortable with. But I don't see any reason at all why we couldn't look for that in the future.
Anybody else? I have another question, Mr. Shuren?
Just a quick, I have to admit, I looked at this and my eyes glazed over a bit and I didn't fully understand it. So just a basic question. Under the changes you're contemplating, do you have any sense that there's anybody who relies on the bus to get to work that won't be able to do that?
That's a very good question. Looking at the numbers, all of the stops that we're currently servicing, the new alignments, all of the new alignments would be within about a 5 to 10 minute walk of an existing stop. So I feel that the answer to that is no, that anybody who currently has transportation, access to fixed route transportation right now with us would not be severely detrimented. And if they are unable to walk, we have multiple types of public transportation that we provide. We also provide our ADA service. So if somebody's unable to walk, they can get qualified and they can get a curbside personalized level of service if they qualify for that. We also have Dial-A-Ride. Dial-A-Ride only serves people that are at least 3/4 of a mile away from our fixed route. However, that's something that more people, anytime I get an opportunity to mention Dial-A-Ride, I like to mention it because it's a service that a lot of people don't know about. And it's 3/4 of a mile outside of our fixed route area. But there you go. Linda, did you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, Dial-A-Ride is actually a service that's, it's the ADA service that's 3/4 of a mile, and that's a mandated service that, people can qualify for. But participating towns such as Mansfield, they have Dial-A-Ride service, and all seniors ride free, and anybody within that area that needs to, they can apply. And so if they can't get to a bus stop and they can't use fixed route, they can call us and they can apply for Dial-A-Ride, and we provide that service to them. So, and when you look at Philip's model, is that there's been no service that we've taken away from any areas. But in all reality, you know, in the test runs, that's where we're really going to see. And we've been doing those. We've been running test runs on all these routes to see whether the on-time performance is realistic as, you know, the model projects. And so we want to leave that open, and we're doing a lot of outreach to the community so that we're hoping that anybody who identifies an area where they would not be served would make us aware of that. And of course, we would address that. For one, when I look at the increased service that we're providing to the senior center, is amazing. It's at least a 200% increased service to the senior center.
I have a question about the maps. The maps don't appear, I can't tell where the bus stops are on them. What is the indicator of a bus stop? There's some arrows, there's some little circles on the blue line, but I don't know what's what.
They are the little circles, are the stops.
The little circles are the stops. Okay, good. So that helps. And the arrows are?
The arrows are the direction. However, the arrows are a bit misleading with these maps. So I would the arrows do represent the overall direction. However, the return route also exists, and that's not represented with the arrows. So keep that in mind.
Okay, good. All right. Ms. Berthelot.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I respect all of the research that went in to make these bus routes work, and I appreciate that. And I have to say, I have no expertise in any of these matters, so it's sort of flat-footed in terms of asking educated questions. That said, one thing I do care deeply about is making sure that residents have a voice, and I'm happy to hear that you've done community outreach to make sure that people's needs are being met. Could you describe some of that community outreach?
Yeah, sure thing. The most recent outreach we had was at the ECTC. We boothed it. I have had a booth at the Nash Zimmer Transportation Center on 2 events. We plan on having our workshop in a couple weeks that will be heavily promoted. This is kind of the grand outreach event coming up. We've also had considerable surveys, which is how we really kicked off the process. We have considerable surveys for people on the bus so that we are serving our existing, making sure our existing clientele are recognized. So considerable surveys, and then we also had input from our operators, from our drivers, and those are the major outreach events. And we also had one at Yukon for the international off-campus housing student event. And that's in a nutshell.
And also, we'll be hosting another event at Juniper Hills this month.
This week, it's Wednesday.
Thanks for that. And I hope maybe some outreach with our human services department for other possible areas where we should be paying attention, making sure to meet the needs of our residents. But it sounds like you're hitting a lot of the important groups that I'm aware of, though I know there are others with more knowledge than I. Thank you.
Mr. Aylesworth.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to throw out a couple comments. One, I assume that the route sort of examination or re-examination and redesign that you guys do, that happens on a pretty regular basis. And so what I'm about to say, would be more of a long-term planning process, I guess, than some sort of short-term knee-jerk reaction. But If I'm understanding what you're proposing to change as far as, what I'll call kind of the 195 corridor, shortening at the four corners, just want to make sure you guys are aware that there continue to be a lot of, well, not a lot of, but multiple pending development proposals, large scale development proposals for the four corners. And so just in terms of thinking about how some residential population, significant expansion in that area may have important implications for kind of what you're proposing to do with your routes. And so to the extent you might not make certain changes now in anticipation of reverting back to serving that area in a few years, just want to make sure you're aware of that. And our staff, Linda Painter, our Director of Planning and Development, would be happy to talk with you guys about what's being proposed. And then second, for the other Linda, WRTD Linda, I want to let you know, and we can talk offline maybe tomorrow, but I wanted WRTD to know that part of our internal planning efforts as you heard earlier, as you sat patiently and waited for your chance to present, we have set aside a pretty robust number of COVID rapid test kits for WRTD because we recognize the importance your drivers have for our community. And we want to make sure that you're taken care of, and we'll be looking to get those test kits into your possession as soon as possible.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. That's you have really no idea how much that means to us. I don't like to, I try not to ever talk about the negatives as we always do, but just trying to keep service on the road. And we've been buying our own test kits, even before it was like kind of kosher to buy test kits. We just decided to do that because we wanted to make it convenient for employees to be able to test and stay at work or know as early as possible. So I am just really honored, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, you're very essential, so you're welcome.
Mr. Osberger.
Yeah, just briefly, I wanted to mirror Terry's sentiments with regard to the RTD and reaching out to human services. That is an area that sometimes gets overlooked.
Thank you very much. I'll definitely take a note of that. And real quick, going back to Mr. Aylesworth's comment on the development, we are partnering with the developers. I've had, I believe, 3 developers reach out personally to me for comments and giving insight to them about our vision with what's around the corner. And if anything, the Four Corners Holiday Mall is really getting an expansion of service in both scenarios, scenario A and B, because Hunting Lodge in scenario A would run year round, and that would be an increase in service because it becomes a more reliable instead of a lifeline service, keeping the high frequency throughout the day. And then scenario B, we'd go even further north. So really we'll definitely keep that in mind, and thank you for that comment. But sorry to jump in there.
Thank you. That was an important piece of information. I think that increased frequency is going to have a real impact because a lot of people are unwilling to take a risk of taking a bus into town, knowing that if they miss the next one, they're stranded. Or it will take them a whole day to do a doctor's appointment that should only take a half an hour. So I think that frequency is really will produce better response for you than anticipated. Any other questions for the RTD people, WRTD people? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation, for your good work, and for keeping our buses running, or your buses running. It's an essential service, and at some point we will revisit the dial-a-ride issues, which we have talked with you about in the past. I don't know. We could use an update on how they're going, but not tonight, please. So thank you once again, and we will move on our agenda. The next item on our agenda is the Community Challenges Grant. Mr. Aylesworth,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Connecticut Community Challenge grant is a new funding vehicle, new program being administered through the department, the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. There's, basically a ceiling, I believe, of $10 million per grant award. And our staff, in partnership with the Downtown Partnership and our counterparts at Yukon and other stakeholders, including folks you'll hear from tonight, have been talking about a variety of possibilities, a variety of potential projects that might be a fit for this new funding program. And I'm going to turn things over to Linda Painter, Director of Planning and Development, to walk us through what the town is proposing to submit for a grant application, knowing that we submitted an intent to apply back in December for a program that really came into existence just this past fall. So, Linda?
Good evening, everyone. As Ryan mentioned, it's been a little bit of a quick turnaround for us. We discussed several different ideas as part of our meetings with the University of Connecticut, or that were the framework meetings. And at the end of the day, the project that we identified as really best meeting the grant criteria is the South Eagleville Road corridor for housing and infrastructure improvements. Let me see if I can. There we go. So the program goals are to improve the livability, vibrancy, and convenience and appeal of communities throughout the state. The NOFA, or Notice of Funding Availability, also indicates that they're hoping to create 3,000 jobs statewide. And they are also planning to allocate 50% of the funds to distressed municipalities. And we are not a distressed municipality, so we will fall into the other funding portion of this. As Ryan mentioned, the cap on grant requests is $10 million. The minimum grant request is $1 million for this program. This is currently the first round. They are anticipating that they will be funding anywhere between $20 million and $50 million in projects in this round. And there's a 50% local match requirement. So however much we request in DECD funding, we have to match at least 50% of that with non-state funds. So we'll be going through that this evening. I know that we did not have that for you in the AIS on Friday. This has been coming together very quickly over the last few weeks. Applications are due at 3 p.m. This Friday. And the one thing I will say is that I think the project that we've identified really hits each and every one of the desired elements that DECD identified in the Notice of Funding Availability. And those are transit-oriented development, so intensifying development near transit hubs, downtown or major hub development that improves or reuses existing property, essential infrastructure that facilitates future development, housing to support affordability in the local workforce, mobility improvements, so that can include transit, bicycle, ADA, pedestrian improvements, and public space improvements. And they really have a wide range, as you can see on the slide, of what they consider public space improvements. So the proposed project that we are recommending for an application involves three major components. The first one is mixed income housing. So as the council is aware, the Mansfield Nonprofit Housing and Development Corporation has been seeking funding for a 42-unit mixed income apartment development on South Eagleville Road. And the current mix of income levels based on their most recent negotiation with the Department of Housing and the Connecticut Housing Finance Agency has 31 of those 42 units that will be income restricted, meaning that you have to meet income levels in order to live there. And as you can see, those units, they trend towards the lower income levels and the more subsidized levels, so 50 and 60% of median income. So the proposed project includes gap financing. So while they are requesting and are in the process of requesting over $12 million from state bond funds and the Connecticut Housing Finance Agency, they are still short in terms of what they need for the development. So gap financing. And then the other item that is included is funding for installation of rooftop solar panels. This is something that DOH and CHAFA have indicated they will not fund. However, MNHDC, it really thinks that this is an important component, and I think we would agree, because this is something that can help reduce the long-term energy costs for the residents of this development. The second component of the project relates to sewer infrastructure, and this is something that you received a brief description of as part of the ARPA recommendations from the town manager. It would include upgrading the equipment at the existing South Eagleville Wrights Village Municipal Pump Station, and as well as reconstructing and extending the existing gravity sewer line that is on the property at Wrights Village to South Eagleville Road, where it would serve not only the Eagleville Green project, but also properties on the north side of the road that are addressed between 108 and 128 South Eagleville Road. And that does include 20 units at Oakwood Apartments. So this would provide a way to get those units off of septic systems. And the last, but definitely not least, component of this relates to pedestrian safety improvements. So this includes, and I will say the first bullet that you see there, extension of the off-road walkway from Maple Road to Separatist Road. This is something we already have planned and funding for. We have federal grant funding for this project. As well as a commitment from the CIP for the local match for that. And both, that is about $1 million, and that is counting towards our local match for the overall project. We are also proposing to construct a walkway along the boundary of the Town Hall and Mansfield Community Center property that would provide access to the existing bus stop. Widen the existing sidewalk that's on the south side of the road to create a multi-use trail between Storrs Road and Maple Road. And I would say the biggest piece of this is installing landscape medians from about 200 feet west of the intersection with Maple Road to slow traffic and improve the pedestrian experience. So if you think about essentially the medians that we have on Storrs Road, north and south of the intersection with 275, we're looking at a similar treatment there with the idea of trying to slow traffic as it's coming into downtown. The next slide, and I want to thank Derek DeLay, who spent a lot of time over the last week or so pulling together a concept design. So the top portion here shows the new walkway. So this is Separatist Road. This is the entrance to Glen Ridge, and this is 275. So this is the new walkway that we do have funding for through the Federal FAST Act grant and town CIP. And then the new wider, I should say, walkway along the south side so that it can accommodate both pedestrians and bicyclists. And in the orange in the center of the road, that's where you see, the concept for starting to add landscape medians about 200 feet west of the intersection with Maple Road, and then leading in to downtown. And the next slide continues that so that, again, you can see these medians continue. And as part of that, we're narrowing the travel lanes to 11 feet and also providing a shoulder for bicycle travel. So this is a very initial conceptual design that we have here. We did this in order to come up with an estimated cost. You'll also see here's the addition of that sidewalk that I talked about for Town Hall property, and then we also included one between Eastwood and Westwood. And the purpose of that is, I think Derek is hoping to include if we can get it down to one pedestrian crossing between Eastwood and Westwood instead of having a crossing at both, an uncontrolled crossing at both intersections, then we may be able to provide a pedestrian refuge in that median. So that is, before I jump into the numbers, does anyone have any questions just about the project components themselves?
Mr. Shaken.
Yeah, I have several, unfortunately. So first of all, I think just sort of reading this application, I get the sense that this particular grant opportunity is really focused on from DCD's perspective on like corridors. And so obviously we have identified affordable housing development as a priority of ours as a community. This project in particular, we've helped them and been partners with them on a number of funding applications over the last few years. This is one. But to me, at least, my priority continues to be the development of affordable housing in this project. And so I know there's some other things that are part of this, like sort of extending this corridor and making improvements to other parts of the corridor. I get the sense that part of those things are things that we are adding to our sort of possibilities list. They're things I haven't heard about as things coming up in the future for us because of this grant. And so is that a correct sense? Like the medians at 195, the widening of the sidewalk between Maple and 195, et cetera. Those are things that I haven't heard thrown around as, capital projects that we are planning on undertaking in the near future, absent this funding.
So I would say some of this is timing. As the council is aware, we had a pedestrian fatality on South Eagleville Road late in 2021. At that time, my counterpart at the university reached out to me and said we would like to work with the town on pedestrian safety improvements to this section of roadway. And quite frankly, since we were working, we had identified the affordable housing component as the centerpiece of this grant application. We thought it made sense to try and seek funding for some of those improvements at the same time.
Okay. And then as far as the improvements to Route 275 itself, am I correct in the assumption that because South Eagleville Road is a state road, that the Department of Transportation would have a say in whether we, on our own dime, installed medians in that road? Like they would be required to approve that road change, is that correct?
Correct.
And I know that we went through a similar process along Route 195 when we made those improvements several years ago, a decade ago, whenever they happened. But I read DOT's letter back to the town regarding the uncontrolled crosswalks, and they don't seem to, at least at this point, be in agreement with us that 275 is an area of town, fatality notwithstanding, that is in need of traffic calming. So this seems like a more extreme traffic calming proposal than the installation of one lighted flashing light at a crosswalk. So I'm just wondering if you or Derek has any idea whether DOT would look favorably on a proposal like this on one of their routes.
I'm going to defer to we have John and Derek here, so I'm hoping they can help out because they are more experts on DOT than I am.
I think DOT would let us do anything as long as we pay for it. I mean, they're not saying we, with 275 with a letter, they're not saying we can't put the rectangular rapid flashing beacons in. It's just we have to pay for it. They'll approve it, So just like we did with 195, they probably thought back 10 years ago that there wasn't much foot traffic on 195 before Stores Center was developed. So the same with 275. As long as we pay for it, I think they would approve it.
Okay. And then finally, my last question is about sidewalks. Back when I used to go to the office every day, I drove past this part of town twice a day, and I would notice in the mornings, especially, one of the major pedestrian issues right in front of the community center is that WRTD, man, everything's tying together this meeting, huh? WRTD drops busloads of students, largely staff who commute from Willimantic on the north side of the street, next to the community center, essentially, who then walk without a sidewalk from the community center to Eastwood Road in order to walk to campus. And so they don't cross the road and then go down and cross it again to get back to Eastwood Road. They instead walk along the shoulder of the road, you know, whatever that is, a tenth of a mile between the community center and Eastwood Road. So I see that there's some sidewalk improvements proposed for the south side of 275. Are we also proposing some sort of pedestrian walkway on the north side between the community center and town hall and Eastwood Road? I know there's some topographic issues and ledge there, but I'm just curious if that's part of this plan.
I've always seen them walk the other way from the bus to 195, and they walk in the road. They're supposed to follow the brick walkway that goes by the community center behind town hall, but I don't doubt you've seen them going towards Eastwood. It makes sense they would do that. I don't think that's what we considered in this. I think it's just to connect the bus stop to 195, which hopefully with it there, they would go that way.
Okay, and then finally on the widening of the existing sidewalk between Maple and Mansfield Apartments, essentially, it is, I guess this is sort of a question maybe for the next section. What's the cost of that portion of the project? I know it's a standard width sidewalk, and we certainly allow bikes and pedestrians to share sidewalks in other parts of town that have standard width sidewalks. So I'm just curious if there's a significant cost associated with that widening, or if it's a relatively simple project.
Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 280,000 the number.
I'll take it. And reserve the right to be corrected, I guess.
That's not
okay. Thanks. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
What'd you say, Derek?
Yeah. So I mean, the 280,000 that you're referencing is for the portion in front of the town hall and community center. There's definitely some topographic issues that Ben was pointing out, and that's what we're kind of having to resolve pretty expensively, unfortunately. And that's probably why it hasn't been built yet. So the other portion that you're talking about, Ben, I believe, is the section between Route 195 in front of Mansfield Apartments to Maple Road. Right now, it's a 6-foot wide walkway. It's not a terribly large cost, as really the walkway is already present. I don't have it broken out, unfortunately, but it's not a very large cost.
Any other questions for Ms. Painter, Mr. Carrington, Mr. Delay?
I just wanted to know, I do have a couple of more slides that are on funding and budget breakdown.
Yes.
So I just wanted
to, these are just questions on the plan itself.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask about exactly what Yukon's role would be in this and why they might, aside from the problems around Eastwood Road, why would Yukon be interested in this?
So I think what we have heard from the university is that is support for the Eagleville Green Housing Project. So they are interested in seeing that move forward. And so I think that combined with that pedestrian safety component, and again, I think as part of our relationship reset, they're looking for ways to support the town as we move forward with various projects. So I'm going to again share my screen. So this slide shows you the estimated project cost and funding sources for the three components. And what you'll see in red is what we are proposing for the town. So in terms of the overall project cost is around $19.9 million. The bulk of that is the Eagleville Green Project. And in terms of a local contribution to Eagleville Green, we are directly to that project. We're proposing $150,000. And that would be from if you approve an ARPA allocation for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that would be the recommendation there. For the sewer improvements, that again is from the ARPA recommendations from the town manager. And the sewer improvements here do have the benefit of reducing the project cost a little bit for Eagleville Green, and it also has the benefit of serving other properties. So that and as well and upgrading the pump station, which is going to be needed at some point in the future. And last but not least, under pedestrian improvements, we're showing a $480,000 match from the town. And that consists of $200,000 that you have previously committed through the CIP as local match for that sidewalk extension from Maple to Separatist, and $280,000, which will be in, I believe, a CIP request that'll be coming to you in the next budget year. And as was described by Derek, this is for that sidewalk connection from the town hall and community center to 195 to downtown. So that those are the three key matches. The other, in response to your question, Mayor, we have estimated that about $500,000 of the pedestrian improvements would be Yukon's share of the project based on their frontage. As part of the Mansfield Apartments redevelopment. And in talking to Laura Cruikshank, she had indicated that while she could not, commit cash from the university, she did say that the university would, participate and do improvements to that frontage as part of their overall redevelopment. So we've included that in here. And then the other match that you can see is private grants that the nonprofit has received in the amount of $207,000, as well as a deferred developer fee for themselves. So, and again, plus or minus $12 million in funding that they are seeking from the Department of Housing and Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. Any questions on the budget breakdown? What the bottom row shows is basically the overall match that is being proposed between those private grants, the deferred developer fee, and the town contributions is 52% of the overall grant ask. One note that I will add is, and unfortunately it doesn't fit into this budget, we are highlighting it in our project narrative, is that in addition to what is proposed here, as the council knows, you previously approved a pilot agreement for the Eagle Hill Green project. And the tax assessor kindly helped me calculate today, essentially, the difference between the taxes that would normally be due versus what we've agreed to in the pilot agreement for the nonprofit. And that amounts to approximately $2.75 million over 20 years. And that helps with the project affordability, both short-term and long-term. So we are including that to note that if you counted that contribution over 20 years, we would actually be at over 100% match for what is requested of DECD.
Thank you. This is a remarkable set of proposals. Does anybody have any further questions before we put a motion on the floor? Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, I'm curious how Yukon arrived at that figure of 500,000. It's probably funding the portion in front of Mansfield Apartments, correct?
So Yukon did not develop that number. That number was developed by the town as part of our cost estimating for the pedestrian improvements. It is based on their frontage for Mansfield Apartments.
Yeah. Are we in discussions with Yukon on that figure?
We have let them know about that figure, and they will be reviewing this application. We are hoping to get a letter of support from the president as well. I think as I mentioned, Yukon it's a little tricky because they'll commit to doing improving their frontage. The dollar amount is harder for them, but this is the format that we have to provide this to DECD. So that's how we're identifying it as their share of the improvements.
Okay, so how did we arrive at that number for Yukon?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How did we arrive at that number of $500,000 for Yukon?
For that, I'm going to defer to Derek July because he did the cost estimation on this.
Carried a 10-foot concrete sidewalk, which is pretty typical for the downtown stores area. So once you include that section of concrete sidewalk, along their entire frontage, as well as relocating a crosswalk in the RRFB associated with that crosswalk, which is the one in front of the bus stop there that has a mid-block crossing. That's how we arrived at the $500,000.
Is it a standard calculation for a 10-foot sidewalk?
Yes, based on an estimate for cost estimating for a 10-foot wide sidewalk, yes.
Okay. So it's a sort of standard formula. That's a question.
Sorry, trying a little different audio setup tonight. Sounds like it's not going well. It's a, so we can take the total length and the width of the sidewalk and utilizing typical cost estimating numbers for a concrete sidewalk. That's how we arrived at that. So we took their frontage, the length, relocating what we thought where the crosswalk would have to be located. And then since there's significant, support for RRFBs for these uncontrolled mid-block crossings, we put those numbers together to come to the $500,000 estimated cost.
Okay, thank you. All right, further questions? Mr. Shaken.
Linda, you mentioned our pilot agreement and calculating it over a period of time and throwing that in as part of our match. I'm just curious, is that something that this grant application allows us to do? And if it is, would it allow us to apply for a larger grant or to shift a portion of our cash costs to the grant should we receive it? Like, for example, if you said it's 20 million over 20 years. So if we say $500,000 a year that we're sort of accepting as a payment in lieu of taxes, would that give us the ability to ask DECD to cover half of the sewer portion of the project or one of the other big chunks that has been identified as coming out of Mansfield's budget?
So the challenge, I'll be honest, the challenge with this is they have given us a form that has, this is how your budget is, this is the source, is it committed, is it cash, is it equity, is it debt? It does not readily allow us to say, oh, we're for, because essentially we're foregoing revenue. We're saying, and what we're saying is that's we're contributing a loss in revenue. We're accepting a loss in revenue because this project is important to us and we want to make it affordable. That's not a budget source that I can list as a project. So it's another way for us to say, don't just look at the dollars that we're putting to the construction. You need to look at the impact that we're taking over 20 years in revenue loss because this is so important to us. Quite frankly, this is something that we got an idea from another community. The architect for Kathy Dorgan, who's on the line for the Mansfield Nonprofit Housing Development Corporation, heard that some other communities were planning on doing this. So the assessor took that format and updated it for me. But again, I'm not sure how to translate a loss in revenue as to how I'm going to pay for a project. So it's more of saying this is something we're willing to do because this is important to us as a community.
Okay. Mr. Shaken, I believe you have a motion.
Yeah, before I make it, I have a question for Linda, which is that the proposed, well, first of all, there's some blanks that I don't have in front of me because you provided numbers tonight, but they aren't in our packet. But second of all, there's a part of the motion is to adopt the resolution that begins on page 53. And my question to you is this a resolution that has been prescribed in full by the state to us, or would a slight verbiage modification be in order? And I can explain what it is if that would help. It's not anything that affects the...
So in answer to your first question, I actually have a slide with an updated motion with the numbers filled in.
Okay.
so that you have that. The resolution itself is not prescribed by the state. Quite frankly, I took a sample. I basically took a resolution we did for a small cities grant. The one thing, and let me see if I can find, there is a requirement in terms of what needs to be. There are a few points that need to be in the resolution. So if you give me a second, I will.
Well, let me be more specific.
Okay.
I'd like to move to adopt the resolution, but make a slight amendment to the first sentence on its second page. So the first sentence on page 54, which, in addition to filling in the blank number, I'd like to have that sentence read essentially that in approving this resolution, the town commits to providing money of the dollars of the required local match for the requested grant, should the grant be awarded and the council decide to accept the award.
Okay.
If that's not part of the required language, then I'd like to include it in our motion.
No, I think generally speaking, it's the requirements were, they look for commitment. So if I understand it, what you're asking to add is, should we choose to accept it? So if they award it and we choose, should we choose to accept it?
This is your mission. Should you choose to accept it? Yes.
Okay, if that's cool, then it sounds like a fudge. Would they see that as a fudge?
Potentially. I mean, I think, you know, it says, you know, essentially what it's saying is we'll commit it. If you award it, we'll commit the funds if we decide we want to move forward with it. But we may change our minds and say, no, we're not doing this.
Well, I'd like to make that as the motion for a variety of reasons that I can explain. I can explain them now before the motion if that would be helpful and get feedback from staff. Now, what would you think is best, Mayor?
Linda, my real question is, do we have to make this commitment as part of the grant application? Or can we hold out an option to refuse the grant?
If you can give me a few seconds, I'm going to need to pull up the notice of funding availability just to go through, as well as the application itself. Hold on.
I mean, I don't want to put language into a resolution that condemns our ability to get the grant.
So one of the questions on the application is, has the approval from the town council, okay, so has the approval from the town council been obtained to A, request this funding from DECD, 2, to undertake this project, and 3, partner with the private entity and others on the development team on the proposed project? If yes, please attach approval / certified resolution. So that's what has to be in a resolution. And I believe, I just want to make sure that's says if yes. I want to make sure that it's not a required attachment. So,
Not to put Kevin on the spot, but I would welcome any feedback from a town attorney if he has any insights on this front.
That was a great way to put me on the spot.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounded from what Linda had read that you were agreeing in making that application. The resolution was to proceed with the project if the grant were awarded. But I don't have the actual language that Linda was reading from on that.
All right, let's do this hypothetical. We approve the grant project, we get the grant. South Eagleville can't get the $12 million they need, and the building is not built. What is our obligation at that point?
So the way this is structured is the sewer improvements could proceed regardless of whether or not South Eagleville moves forward. And that is not grant funding. That is $750,000 in town ARPA funds. So we could proceed forward, and there would be benefits for, any future redevelopment of that site, as well as, again, getting properties off of, eventually giving them an option, an alternative to the current septic systems that they're on. The pedestrian improvements, likewise, is a separate component. So if they do not get the 12 million that they need and that project doesn't move forward, we see pedestrian safety as something in this area. We already have over 300 units of multifamily housing on this corridor. So pedestrian safety and improving mobility is a need that exists, separate and independent of the affordable housing. I think it makes the affordable housing component attractive just because it has such great access to downtown, as well as the senior center, Mansfield Nursing Center for Nursing and Rehabilitation, a potential future Masonic Care project. But again, those components are separate and distinct. And we tried to structure the budget in a way that if they receive, and they will see, they do specifically ask how much funding is going to each element. So presumably they might come through and go, you know what? Honestly, of the three pieces, the Eagleville Green is the most shovel ready. The least shovel ready is the pedestrian safety improvements and they are looking for things that will be constructed in 2 to 3 years. So, there is that, that kind of caveat that presumably they could reduce the project if they wanted to. I was just looking for commitment. They do ask for kind of letters of commitment, but again, in the budget format in the grant application, you can say requested. It can be this is where we are, and the council is approve this application. Subject to the that we'll make a decision based on what comes forward.
I saw Mr. Coleman's hand first and then Mr. Shaken.
The $750,000 allocated ARPA funds for this project, don't they have to be approved and voted by the council yet?
Correct. That is.
Are we a little ahead of ourselves here already?
Well, and I understand that, but unfortunately, this grant deadline is Friday, and so that's why we asked for this to be on the same evening as the ARPA discussion. We unfortunately it's not a timing we would choose. We can put in that the town is still, while it's one option is to say that it's under discussion by the council, that it's been requested but no decision has been made.
Yeah, I would request that.
Mr. Shaken.
So I'm gonna vary a little slightly, Brian, from that request, and so I'm prepared to make the motion that I suggested a few minutes ago, which is I think in between the two things, which is a commitment of funds to the project, but pending final approval of the total scope of the project once we have received a grant from the Department of Economic and Community Development, whether we get all we're asking for, a portion or whatever. So I think that's what's prudent from a policy perspective, and I'd like to do that, but Linda, in order to do it, I need the numbers up on the screen. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll amend it on the fly, I think, hopefully.
Well,
you said you had a motion with numbers.
Yep.
There we go. Okay.
See if this helps.
Okay, so let me read it before I start reading it out loud.
Yes.
May I ask?
Yes.
Again, this is fully discretionary on DECD's part. They can decide whether it's not a point allocation rigidly determined. They can decide they like it, they don't like it, they don't like the tone, which seems wishy-washy, or they think it's fully a go. Is that correct? They could make that discretionary decision.
They have criteria that they have established for awarding the grants, and so I don't know what points you get for each one, but they, so they do, it's the award and scoring criteria are features and characteristics that support the livability and vibrancy in the local community and region, community benefit / engagement, inclusive growth and resilience, economic impact, and this is where local match share of costs comes in, shovel readiness, and then it has assembly of funding / capital stack and presence of private and other partners crucial to project implementation. And then applicant team is, so that makes up the kind of 5 buckets of criteria that they're looking at. So they're looking at the financing, they're looking at, how secure is your other funding, and they'll go from there.
No, I mean, just the basic question is, does anything that sort of qualifies things rule us out?
The answer is clearly somewhere in between we don't know and no. And so I'd like to make the motion if we can do that.
Linda, could you get us back to the motion?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't
Okay.
realize that moved to my other screen and covered it.
That's okay. I'd like to make the motion to move effective today to adopt the attached resolution with the blanks in the resolution being filled in with the grant amount and the match amount will be noted in my motion, and the typo corrected that would change "and" before the University of Connecticut without a comma, and that the resolution be
Sorry.
It's okay. That the resolution be updated to reflect the full language of this motion. Which I can't see. Linda, go back.
Yeah, sorry about
Okay.
that. I accidentally clicked. I'm still getting a handle on the screen.
Okay.
So I'm gonna not touch anything.
And that resolution will authorize the submission of a Connecticut Communities Challenge grant application in the amount of $4,854,595 for affordable housing and infrastructure improvements in the South Eagleville corridor, and committing $2,180,000 of the required local match, including $800,000 of federal SAFE grant funding, should the grant be awarded and should the town decide to accept the award. And further move that effective today to authorize the mayor to submit a letter to DECD in support of both the grant application and specifically funding for the Eagleville Green project.
Is there a second to Mr. Shaken's motion? Ms. Berthelot seconds. Mr. Shaken.
Sure. In support of my motion. Well, first of all, just a note for the record, the piece of language I added to the notes of the small changes to the resolution is in that sentence, the first sentence on page 54. This motion, as Linda presented it as I read it, requires the council to come back together when everything has been figured out and sort of make a final approval for the project. And I think the resolution that we adopt needs to reflect that same language. And so first of all, I think this is a really good thing, and it's something that the town needs to do. Number one, we've discussed this several times over the last few years. This project on South Eagleville Road that the Nonprofit Housing Development Corporation is trying to develop and has stumbled sometimes with some funding over the last few years, but is persevering through. I think is a really important development for the town, and it's a really important development for that particular part of town, it being adjacent to some of the other affordable housing units that we have in town, and nearby, theoretically, a large senior housing complex that one of these years Masonic may decide to build on Maple Road. So I want to commend them for their work on this. I think it's something that is important for us to support, but I also, in trying to be a little technical about what it is and how we're actually approving it as it relates to this grant fund, I want to just sort of touch on some of the points that Brian brought up that I tried to address, which is that I do think we are, by necessity, given the availability of this state funding, putting a few carts before the horse on this. And this happens sometimes where we hear of a state grant and it's something that in the end we're going to support, but we don't necessarily go through the same motions we might go through if a project came to us without a time crunch related to a state funding grant application deadline of 4 days from now. And so in particular, there's two things in this project that are concerning. One is somewhat purely process, which is that the next item on our agenda is our first consideration of Ryan's ARPA expenditure proposal. He proposed $750,000 in December be spent on this project, but we have not deliberated on that yet. We haven't made a decision. And so I intend to support that expenditure in the end, but it seems like it's falling a little bit outside of what we had discussed and agreed upon as how we would encumber our ARPA allocation. And then secondly, just as far as the project itself goes, and specifically how our commitment for sewer enhancements there is related to it. While I understand that from Linda's explanation that those sewer improvements could happen if this project does not proceed, I personally would not be supportive of them happening absent the development of the Eagleville Green project. I think if that land were to become developable without the Nonprofit Housing Development Corporation and someone were to build, say, a market rate complex on it or whatever, that those sewer improvements I would look to other sources to fund them. In my mind, our commitment to support that portion of the project is an extension of our commitment to support Eagleville Green specifically. So to that end, I think there's a lot up in the air still in terms of Eagleville Green's funding. As Linda noted, there's $12 million in their pending applications for state funds, including $4.5 million. I understand that is being requested from the State Bond Commission. So I would like to see more commitment of resources to fund that project before I am comfortable spending $750,000 in sort of preemptively improving the sewer connection to that property. So I would like to do it, but I would like that property to be much closer to development, perhaps, than to financing than it is today before we put a shovel in the ground on that $750,000 in sewer improvement. And so that's, I think, why primarily I think it's a good idea to have the council, after DECD has made awards, if we are to receive one, to come back with the receipt of that grant and make final confirmation of our commitment to match the funds based on the facts on the ground as of that time, which may very well be different than what they are today. I hope that's made sense. I hope you all will support the motion. And at the end of the day, we can get to a place where the state is providing several $1 million in support of some really crucial development and infrastructure projects on South Eagleville Road.
Does anybody else wish to comment on the motion? Ms. Berthelot.
Only to say how full-throatedly I support the submission of this particular grant application. I think it's clear when the state asks communities to match funds. I mean, they're giving us a real wonderful opportunity here, and we'll have to pony up if we get the money. I know it's a long shot. These things always are. Mostly want to really commend the staff for getting this done in such a quick manner over the holidays. And I hope it goes through. I hope that we get this money. And these are initiatives that we, as a community, support. We really want affordable housing. We really want safe roads. And this will really get us going in the right direction. So thank you.
Mr. Ellsworth?
I just want to say, I think all the points have been made, and certainly the points that Deputy Mayor Shakin has made are valid. And I think we all recognize that whether we like it or not, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing going on here, in terms of, somebody has to kind of be the first to act, and our or the council's action on this certainly will hopefully free up additional funds from the state and other sources that might otherwise not be released if this important step isn't taken. So.
Anybody else? I would like to comment that the sewer improvements would also be beneficial to Wright's Way, which is a low and moderate income housing development. As Linda said, this pump station will have to be upgraded or replaced at some point, so this might be a little sooner than necessary, but it will certainly be of benefit to the existing housing in that area already. Are we ready to vote? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this motion? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? Hearing no objection, I will rule that the motion has been adopted unanimously. Thank you very much to the staff for this. This is creative, interesting, and the fact that we are able to bring all of these various parties to bear is really a sign of the tremendous work that's gone on over the past 6 months with both with the university and with all of our other partners and collaborators. All right, ARPA funding, Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the late hour, I'm not going to spend too much time, I guess, reviewing presentation materials that were made at the November 22nd meeting. But I will share a couple slides. Hopefully, everybody sees the title slide right now, and we'll focus more on your discussion and questions and comments that the council has. I did want to draw folks' attention, though, to a few minor proposed adjustments to the recommendations that I made back in November. Won't spend too much time recapping, the broad purposes and amount of funding that we're receiving from ARPA. Only to reiterate for those watching at home, the town of Mansfield is set to receive a little over $7.5 million in federal funding that will come in 2 tranches. And these are 5 broad categories or eligible uses of ARPA funding as laid out in the legislation and the associated federal rules handed down from the U.S. Treasury. On this topic, I want to point out that we're still reviewing and interpreting the changes that were made in the basically in the transition from the Treasury's interim rule to the final rule. The final rule was published just this last week, Friday. So it's late breaking information. But it appears that there have been significant changes in this particular area in terms of how municipalities are allowed to calculate or the ceiling of total funds that they can pursue revenue loss recapture. I won't regurgitate the formula that I shared with you before, but suffice it to say it's a much simpler calculation now and will essentially allow the town of Mansfield, should the council wish, to essentially exhaust its full $7.5 million allocation as revenue loss recapture and potentially use that for then a whole variety of municipal projects and purposes that aren't restricted to those on this list. So basically it opens up a world of potential uses beyond what was imagined previously, which is where all the original recommendations flowed from, trying to make recommendations fit these different categories. So there's a lot that we're gonna have to try to digest. Is kind of the moral of the story. So these are the recommendations that were made. I have since color coded these. Hopefully everybody had a chance to review the attachment that I circulated as part of the packet that broke things down into basically different windows in which a particular proposal, whether it's a project or initiative, could be completed. Those that are shown in green in your packet were those that can be completed within a year. Orange was 1 to 2 years, red was 2 to 4 years, and purple was 4 to 6 years. And of course, just to remind the council, ARPA funds have to be obligated within basically 4 years and spent within 6 years. They have to be funds have to be obligated by the end of December 2024, and and spent 2 years after that. So here we are. Everything that's proposed is part of the broad funding area or eligible funding area of supporting public health response. Everything that's laid out and it was laid out in the presentation I provided back in November could essentially be completed within a year. These are all proposals that can be acted on relatively swiftly. That doesn't mean that there's no additional planning to be done, but they're not the sorts of projects that would take multiple years with which to pull off. I also want to point out that there's one addition to this category from the last presentation I made, and that's the last bullet point you see here, COVID-19 direct response efforts. So the request you saw back in November was for a total of $552,500. It's now $20,000 north of that. And that's out of a recognition that we are incurring various expenses as part of our ongoing response. Think mass distribution events, think of additional people power and overtime, whether it's resident troopers or other staff that go into that. And so we are incurring some additional expense. And so we wanted to try to recapture some of that expense as a result of responding to the pandemic. Next, moving on to addressing negative economic impacts. This really ran the full gamut. Everything from under 1 year to more of the 4 to 6 year category, and the latter being the Eagleville Green project. And it's not that the project would necessarily have to take that long. It was put in this category, and these are all a little subjective, but this has to do with the fact that there's obviously a lot of effort that would go into a construction project of this nature, but also recognition that there are challenges that lie ahead in terms of pulling together all the various funding and all the match required. And a lot of this is factors outside of the town's control. But you can see again, these projects run the gamut from able to be completed within roughly 1 year to more of the 4 to 6 year variety. I also want to point out, and this is sort of late breaking information as well, or new interpretation, perhaps I should say. But the second bullet here, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund seeding, of which $500,000 was recommended. We need to do a little more research in this area because it appears that while certainly supporting affordable housing meets the eligible use criteria, one of the issues we're looking at is using ARPA funds, including funds that are recovered from revenue loss replacement, using those funds to fund a fund, no matter what that fund is, seems to be prohibited. The examples they use mostly centered around funding things like pension funds, but we're getting some feedback that suggests any financial reserve, of which an affordable housing trust fund would be, seed funding that for things to be done later might not cut muster. So we need to think more about how we approach that. Up to and including the fact, and I guess I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but if it's the council's desire to ultimately to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, or whatever dollar amount, whether it's $500,000 or more or less than that, one way around that seems to be you are able to use the revenue recapture method to fund basically any quote unquote customary municipal service. So what does that mean? That means that if the corresponding dollar amount, using $500,000 in this case, if it was the council's will to use $500,000 in recovered revenue to offset $500,000 of the fire department budget, and then use $500,000 from the general fund to fund an affordable housing trust fund, we think you could do that. It's basically using a workaround to accomplish the exact same goal. You're not technically then using ARPA money to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, using ARPA money to fund the fire department, and realizing the savings by not using taxpayer dollars to fund the fire department in the order of $500,000, you could then afford to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So again, these are all interesting mechanics and scenarios that eventually we can talk through. even if not tonight. Again, the recommendation from last time was to use just over $2 million of our $7.5 million in revenue loss replacement, and a small amount of that, $25,000, to fund financial consulting services specifically for the Mansfield Community Center. Oops. And then funding water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. The digital broadband project inclusion initiative, $300,000. That's something that could be acted on within a year and basically built out within a year. The expansion of the Four Corners water and sewer service area would definitely be a multiple year project that would take time to pull together and get state approvals, and of course the design, engineering, and construction components of that would take some time as well. So that's it in a nutshell, except for this last piece, which again I want to point out a change that's being proposed from the previous recommendations I provided you. My prior recommendation was to use $150,000 of ARPA funds to provide premium pay. I actually proposed doing it in the form of gift cards to local businesses, but providing basically a monetary reward to municipal and school essential workers for a variety of reasons, including a much more restrictive definition of what is a frontline essential worker, and the realization that that would apply to very few town and school staff, as well as also coming to better understand that purchasing gift cards, while it has monetary value, that the premium pay had to come in the form of actual taxable payroll. The combination of those two things, and really more the former, the fact that the definition of eligible employees was so narrowly defined, has led me to believe that while there is merit, strong merit in the council deliberating on premium pay for essential workers, I believe that should be removed from the ARPA deliberations process, and the council should consider that from other funding sources, including the enhanced pilot payments that the town is currently receiving from the state. I just think that with fewer restrictions on the definition of essential workers, that would be a better way to go, and the council can deliberate under those parameters. So this is just a quick summary, which basically is the same numbers you saw before, with the lone exception that the bottom line total has gone up by $20,000 in the supporting public health response area. And so the net residual now is roughly $170,000. The difference between how these monies are being proposed to be used and the $7.54 million ARP allocation the town's receiving. So that's the update, and really am interested in getting some feedback from the council on what's being proposed.
Mr. Jason.
So can I go back for a second to the new guidance? Can you provide a couple of words, or if Charmaine is there, can she provide a couple of words of detail about this new guidance related to revenue loss? Are you saying that Treasury has essentially allowed municipalities to claim, or would allow Mansfield to claim, the entirety of our grant as revenue loss based on some new formula? Because that would be, if that's the case, that would be shocking. I mean, that's counter entirely to the plain language in the Federal American Rescue Plan Act.
Correct.
Which specifically prohibits that practice.
The final rule, so what the final rule did, if you remember, when staff were providing the council with kind of a play-by-play of what was in the interim rule, there was a formula proposed for calculating lost revenue. And it was done at sort of the bottom line for the town level. It wasn't on a fund-by-fund level. It was sort of the town's bottom line. And so you started with your actual revenues in your most recent, quote unquote, pre-COVID year, which basically for us, if you looked at it in the fiscal year context, would have been the 2018-19 fiscal year, because 19-20 saw a little bit of bleed over in terms of impact from COVID. And so if you took that benchmark year, that baseline year, the formula allowed you to add a 4.1% escalator on top of that for each subsequent year for the next several years. And so any revenues that the town received, actual revenues the town received in those ensuing years, would be able to be compared with that escalator adjusted number. And it would show, in our case, then finance helped us generate these numbers using conservative sort of estimates of what would be eligible to claim, about $2.5 million of losses. And so then my recommendation subsequently recommended a little over $2 million of our $7.5 million for that. The final rule, and this is where there's been a big change, the final rule basically doesn't abandon the formula. It says you can use the formula if you want to, but if you don't want to use the formula, regardless of the size of your budget, regardless of the size of your actual losses, regardless of the size of your population or anything, you can use $10 million or your full allocation if it's less than $10 million. And so that's a pretty big change. And so you can use, so in our case, obviously we would tap out at 7.54 million. And we would be allowed to use that 7.54 million. I don't have the exact language in front of me, so I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But basically, it says you can use it for any customary municipal service. And so that could be, it doesn't have to be replacing the cost of doing things the way you've always done them. It could be a service improvement, but it has to be a service improvement or an expansion in an area of service that the town has customarily provided. So to use an extreme example, and I, obviously using hypotheticals, people run with things. This is how rumors start, but using an example in the area of recreation, the town has basketball courts in the community center. And so if the town council's desire was to use ARPA funds to build additional basketball courts, that would appear to be using this sort of recovered revenue, that would be eligible because we currently offer basketball courts, even though we're looking to add basketball courts. That's something we already do. However, if the town wanted to use the funds to build a golf course, something that the town does not currently have, does not have a municipal golf course, that would probably be deemed as outside the realm of a service we currently provide. So all that to say, the council has the option of making, basically things a bit more streamlined and dramatically increasing the amount of money we look to claim for revenue loss recovery up to and including the full amount. And then how those funds are used once they are deposited into the general fund. Basically, and if Charmaine's there, I guess I would offer to turn it over to her to fill in some gaps because I know she's been participating in late breaking training that was happening today. My understanding is that, basically we could use $7.5 million to offset any number of things that are standard things that we do, programs and services that we provide as part of our operating budget. And then essentially use that corresponding amount of quote unquote savings to do an unlimited number of things without having to tie it back to the eligible uses of the act. But Charmaine, do you want to speak to that if you're still on? And I can't see the participant list, so she's possible we've lost her.
That's okay. That's a fine explanation for now. I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that later. I have some feedback, but I think Ron has a question. So
just quickly, we can talk about this all. The business relief proposal, which I am enthusiastic about, all of that fits into what you're talking about, including the property tax credit relief and so forth. We can do all that.
Yeah. So the recommendations, I given that this again was late breaking news on Friday, I didn't have it within me, nor did I think it would probably be a good use of time to try to do a dramatic overhaul of the recommendations wholesale based on, this changing. I think the sorts of things we're proposing doing with the fund, frankly, it's not that the proposed uses would change. It would just be sort of the mechanics of how we got there would change. I mean, the council, you may have different ideas of things you want to prioritize if there were fewer restrictions. And so that's obviously why you guys will deliberate on all this. But, my suspicion was that whether it was kind of a quote unquote direct use of the ARPA funds, i.e. it directly lined up with an eligible use category, or we went the sort of simpler route of revenue loss replacement, and then funded a lot of these things through the general fund once those general fund savings were realized. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other from like a final outcome standpoint. It's just one way of doing it. Seems to avoid a lot of heartburn and concern about, well, if we do X or Y or Z, what if the federal government decides or comes back and tells us later, yeah, we don't approve of that. So,
Mr. Shaken.
Never mind. I have feedback. If people have questions, I'm happy to wait until questions are answered to share feedback.
Questions? Mr. Coleman.
I see there's 300,000 allocated for the businesses of town of Mansfield. Has anybody assessed the actual harm or damages that have been done to the businesses in Mansfield caused by the pandemic? Where do we come up with that 300,000? It could possibly be that the need could be quite much higher than that. Is there a way that we can calculate the damage to the businesses here in the town of Mansfield?
I know Cynthia's on the line, and so I guess I'd turn over to her to see if she has any thoughts on how that would be calculated. But I would say, Brian, maybe before Cynthia steps in, that the $300,000 figure was certainly not derived because we believe that reflected on a dollar for dollar basis the sum total of the actual, losses or damages. It was frankly, looking at the total portfolio or sort of a range of things that we thought, based on council feedback and stakeholder feedback, resident feedback from surveys we've done, where those dollars would be best sort of applied on a proportionate basis. And so that seemed to be, proportionally based on support for different uses of the ARPA money, an appropriate amount. But it definitely was not derived because we did a calculation and came up with $300,000 as a bottom line financial impact number. But Cynthia, if you're on, do you have thoughts on that?
Sure. Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Yes, as Ryan said, that was what we've been thinking of as a accumulation of different ideas that could be put forward for business relief. We can track, there is some information on what businesses received loans or grants through the CARES Act, through the various programs that the federal government has had. I think what will be key will be for the council to determine a few key factors in how you would want the money to be distributed. Is it trying to distribute to as many businesses as possible? Which partly gets to, I think, Councilman Coleman's question. Do you distribute it as quickly to as many to have the greatest impact on businesses which receive funds? For instance, if people already receive funds, would they be an eligible business? The good thing is we have several communities that have already put together applications for funds, particularly during the whole early part of the pandemic, and some of those programs are continuing with the ARPA funds.
Further questions, Mr. Shaken?
Sure. I'll just share my feedback generally, and I'll start with sort of process-based stuff first, which is that I think we ought to come back to a large portion of this conversation, given, Ryan, the announcement of this final rule that sort of changes a lot of the pieces of what you had initially proposed. And I don't get the sense that since you've understandably been tied up with COVID response and everything else, that you've had a chance to go through each of the detailed proposals that you made in December and sort of match them with guidance, whether it's changed or not in the final rule, to see if they're even still possible, let alone sort of analyzed and come up with a recommendation with regard to these new completely ridiculous ability for us to claim our entire grant as revenue loss and spend the money on whatever we want. So I think generally it would make sense for you to do that and then come back to us with with any revisions, further revisions that might need to happen. Secondly, I think that from a process perspective, it's just my opinion, it would make sense for us to make some decisions on the projects that are in the green in what you presented tonight, things that are ready to go, ready to get moving, especially some of the public health related improvements that could make an impact on the health of people in our municipal facilities as soon as they're done, like the air handling work at the library, for example. And I don't see any reason why the council might not be prepared in relatively short order, like at our next meeting or at the meeting after that, to say, yeah, let's get moving on X amount of these dollars. But I think there's some other things in your proposals that need some further review. And the good news is we have time and we're under no obligation to encumber $7.5 million by the end of the month by any stretch of the imagination. So I think it should be incumbent on us to give Ryan a sense of the things in his proposal that we think are good ideas and ought to move forward, so that Ryan can commit some of the staff time that would be necessary to give us a more fully fleshed out proposal that we can tweak and approve. So this business relief that Cynthia was just talking about, that some of us have had questions about, there's a lot of possibilities in Ryan's proposal that needs some work and some time to come up with, dollar amounts and process and applications and that kind of thing. And so I think we ought to say, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's move forward with that. And then there's some other things I think that maybe we want to spend some more time thinking about. My other two pieces of feedback are getting more specific. One, just in general, I would like to see dollars that we would like to spend to further the development or redevelopment of affordable housing funnel through the trust fund. And so that means, to me, depositing the $750,000 for the sewer project we just talked about at Evil Green, the dollars for the potential septic upgrade at White Oaks, and whatever else there might be, making a lump sum deposit into the trust fund out of ARPA with the commitment we would need to make one way or another, unless we got fancy with revenue loss, to spend those dollars by the end of the period, rather than putting some seed money in and then funding affordable housing through other means. I think we created the trust fund to fund affordable housing, and we have this opportunity to fund it and to fund some affordable housing development right now. And then finally, my piece of specific feedback, just speaking as one counselor, is having read all these proposals, I don't think the proposal for the sort of Goodwin School sewer development is ready for prime time. And I think it's putting the cart way before the horse for a number of reasons, including that we've committed publicly, I think, to the town to having a process that begins once the new school opens to sort of consider and make decisions about the use of Goodwin and Vinton elementary schools once they are closed. And I think this sort of skips that process. And so then as a result, if that's like kind of the biggest chunk of dollars in this proposal, that would be unallocated if we moved that project into the future, if that's where we decided to go in the future, and funded it through capital expenditures or other normal means. And so my request is to you, Ryan, for follow-up, is if that is indeed the way that everyone goes, because right now it's just me, what would be the next things on your list? What are things that you left off that you think would be able to be funded out of that $2.25 million that I at least think we ought to pull out of ARPA spending on that particular project?
So no. Oh, wait.
And you don't have to respond tonight. I think these are flagging things for budget. Like, hey, we want to do this. You know how we normally handle the budget process, rather than us making up appropriations out of thin air. We often say, look, we're going to do this instead. So can you tell us from a staff perspective what you might recommend for this amount of money if we're thinking about making this change? And that's kind of where I'm thinking I would rather handle the answer to that question.
Are you asking Mr. Aylesworth to respond right now, Ben?
No, the opposite. I'm saying in the hypothetical that everybody agrees with me and decides we don't want to fund the Four Corners sewer expansion down to Goodwin School for the reasons that I said or otherwise.
Okay.
What would Ryan's recommendation be if we decided not to spend 2.25 million on that project and we wanted to spend it on other things? What are some other things that he thought worthy but didn't quite make this final cut that he might add if given $2.25 million more dollars?
Maybe we need a list of the top 10 things that didn't make it, because there may be other areas where we have some ideas.
Well, I don't.
Or top 5, or
Yeah. So maybe without, I guess, getting into a back and forth, I will show, because this was a slide that was presented in November. So just to give folks a flavor of items that were deferred, that were considered not deemed without merit, but just ultimately didn't make the original cut. And so these are what those were. This isn't a totally exhaustive list, but this is pretty representative in no particular order. And one big project, the regional wastewater system study, and actually sort of the redevelopment of the Goodwin Vinton School sites. But I understand the point that Ben's making about really wanting to defer further action on those, given that there's sort of stakeholder engagement process. He's concerned that we're sidestepping. Some of these, I guess, the point being that dollar amounts, budgets were not really vetted for yet.
Boy, I personally would like to see some numbers around the redevelopment planning. Whether that means estimated costs for hiring inspectors to find out what the remediation costs might be for reusing those buildings. I mean, that would be a really useful way to spend some money. But that's only my personal input.
So not to give special consideration, I guess, to anything on this list, but I guess I'm kind of about to do that. I would just point out that the expansion of the water system to the middle school, which shows up as the #1 sort of sub-bullet on the water utility system extension list. Had we received, I guess, $10 million, if there was room for another 2.5, that's probably the project that would have also been on this list, or taken off this list and would have been on the list that moved forward, just because that got a lot of internal support. And I know the school district's very interested in that project because they're concerned about chronic water quality issues that they're experiencing at the middle school. And so getting the middle school on public water and being able to serve additional households, along the way, was something that there seemed to be a lot of internal support for.
All right. So my next question is, what do we do at our next council meeting to discuss ARPA fund usage? Mr. Osberger?
Well, I had some questions about some of this stuff overall. Maybe getting back to some of the things that Ben was saying, or even Brian, with respect to the businesses, maybe there needs to be an audit of the businesses out there that may or may not need the funding, because maybe it seems like we're leaving our businesses in town in the lurch for not, offering up the funding to them, or perhaps they don't know what's available to them. And I think that that's something that needs to be addressed. Number 2, Ryan, back on a few slides, you said there was something on there about arts funding, $79,000. Did I see that? I think it was in red.
Yes, you did. And so that's contemplating funding support in large part for public art projects. And so one of the examples that's sort of being considered as a tangible example of something that would actually potentially come to fruition is, with all the discussion about development or redevelopment of the Four Corners, and using the pending project, the standard, the Holiday Mall property as an example. And Linda, you know, if she's still there, she might not be, but, you know, she would be able to speak to this with more detail than I. My understanding is that for various reasons in terms of DOT right-of-ways and other sort of physical considerations of the site, landscaping, aesthetically pleasing landscaping that resulted in, you know, deep-rooted trees by the road that wouldn't fly. And so in lieu of being able to do landscaping, you know, vegetated, you know, buffers and that sort of thing along 195 in that area, one thought was using some ARPA funds to install and create public art in that area. So basically replace landscaping with public art so that, you know, it had the street curb appeal in lieu of vegetation that's typically installed for that purpose. So that's an example, Mr. Osberger, of something that's, you know, being contemplated for use of those funds. But there's sort of a wide range of uses for the arts funds. That's in terms of eligible uses under ARPA. And Cynthia, if you're still there, I was going to say she might have some thoughts too, because I know that funding for the arts was part of one of the proposals that the partnership put forward. But I don't know if Cynthia, see she's, oh, there she is.
Sorry, everybody, keep readjusting here. Yeah, there are a couple of follow-up to what Ryan said. So we have been approached by Concenari, who I think several folks know, local choir group. They had some interest in some funding. And in addition, I think what Ryan had in his memo was also a heavy emphasis on public art for our public spaces, particularly in downtown stores. So there's definitely several ideas about how best to use some funding to really enliven our community and support the arts.
Mr. Katzenberger.
Oh, thank you. I'm usually not eager to suggest additional meetings or new meetings, but I think obviously we all know the importance of this topic. I think it would be useful if we had a special meeting only on this issue or to spend. It's hard, you know, whether it's because it's late at night or relatively late at night or because of the press of other business we're all doing today. I think it would be, whether it's a weekend or simply at night during the week, to have a meeting that we can talk about this from the start.
I agree with you, because I have the feeling that we're just spinning our wheels right now and we don't really know where we're going, but we need more time to do it. And it's now 10:20 and there's still a couple of things on our agenda that we need to get to. So unless somebody has a strong objection, I'm going to ask the town manager to set up a special meeting, a virtual meeting, obviously, at some point in the near future where we can go over these plans in detail, decide what kinds of things we support, what kinds of things we don't. Mr. Aylesworth, is that okay with you?
Sounds agreeable to me.
Anybody have any serious objection? Okay.
Sounds great.
All right, then let's move on from there. The next item is reports of council committees. I don't believe we have any council committee who've met since our last meeting. In the absence of Mr. Bruder over the next month, I have asked Ms. Berthelot if she would take over the chair of Committee on Committees. And she has agreed. Mr. Bruder has also agreed. So unless anybody has an objection, that's how we'll handle this period of time. Any problems? Okay. Next item is the departmental and advisory committee reports. No comments. Petitions and requests. You will have seen the DOT response letter. I also want to call to your attention the Human Rights Commission annual report. We formed this organization a year ago. there was some question about whether they would have any work to do, but I think you can see that over the past 12 months, they have been working very hard. We've handed them a number of projects, and their work has been stellar as far as I can tell. So I think we owe them a real statement of thanks, and we will receive the annual report and hope that next year they continue to be as productive and as useful as they have been. Mr. Shaken?
I just wanted to comment briefly on DOT's response letter. I know you had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, when in your report, Ryan, that you were planning you were taking them up on their offer to schedule this meeting, and I know that the mayor was planning on being there. I just wanted to say I'm not particularly satisfied with their response. I don't think it represents any change at all from the policy that they've articulated for the last 4 or 5 years, which is since we made our first request for safety improvements to the uncontrolled crosswalk on South Eagleville. And in fact, I will note, I think it was in our packet at the last meeting, that when they repaved South Eagleville Road, they removed the safety feature of that crosswalk. It had previously been an illuminated crosswalk, and that did not make the cut when the road was repaved, and so it's now just a regular old crosswalk. And again, as someone who's driven towards 195 on South Eagleville Road at night in foggy conditions, etc., on the way home from work many times, it's really hard to see as a driver. I know it's really hard to see as a pedestrian. So I hope that at that meeting we can continue to press DOT to fulfill their commitment to keeping their own roads safe. And I think there must be some room for them to add some construction budget for that, as they'll be in town installing the other ones along 195 this summer. So I appreciate that they may let us spend our own money on whatever we want, and we may have to get there, but I continue to hope that they will change their course. And I trust that the mayor will make that clear.
Thank you. Okay, any items for future agendas? Mr. Coleman?
Yes, I'd like to put on a future agenda parking issues at Store Center related to the use of the parking garage by E.O. Smith students.
Mr. Aylesworth?
Happy to add that.
Okay.
Certainly a topic that we've been discussing at a staff level with Laz and briefly with E.O. Smith administration and even Yukon. So happy to have the discussion. And I think ultimately we're probably looking at the need to organize some stakeholder meetings on that particular topic because, well, I guess parking is just not a benign issue, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I do know that not only has the council been discussing this, but so has there have been some discussions at the partnership level as well. All right. We do need a brief executive session. Would somebody move to take us into executive session, Mr. Shaken?
I move that we enter executive session to discuss strategy and negotiations with respect to pending claims of litigation in accordance with Connecticut General Statute Section 1-206B, and that we invite to that executive session the town attorney and the town manager.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion? Mr. Kotchenberger seconds. Anybody object? Motion adopted unanimously. Okay. What do we do to get into executive session? The administrator is still here. The town clerk and Tasha need to leave.
And I think am I set up already as like a co-host or something?
Yes, Ryan, you should be the host when I go. And IT needs sleep. Does IT do we need to come back or you guys are going to adjourn right after?
Yes, so no need to.
So, okay.
Thanks, Tasha.
You're welcome.